Hey there, tonight we're diving into the wild world of medieval English hunting, where the truth is that bagging a boar often included more pratfalls than prowess. And yes, sometimes the hounds were better dressed than the hunters. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. In medieval England, the thrill of the hunt was less about the adrenaline rush of chasing a deer through the underbrush, and more about navigating a labyrinth of social hierarchies, legal red tape, and let's face it, a good old-fashioned power trip. Picture this. A world where your right to hunt wasn't just a weekend pastime, but a neon sign flashing your social status. Much like today's obsession with exclusive club memberships, only instead of a swanky gym or a posh country club, it was sprawling forests and fields that were the playground of the elite. Now, don't let the romantic image of Robin Hood and his merry band of outlaws fool you. The truth was far grittier. The forest laws, those infamous statutes that dictated who could hunt what, where, and when, were as complex as they were harsh. Instituted by William the Conqueror, these laws were designed to protect royal hunting grounds, turning vast swaths of the English countryside into exclusive preserves for the king and his cronies. If you were a commoner caught with a bow in hand, you might find yourself on the wrong end of a hefty fine, or worse, the business end of medieval justice, which wasn't exactly known for its leniency. So, what exactly were these forest laws, and why did they matter so much? Imagine a legal system that essentially said, all the best places to hunt belong to the crown. Everyone else take a hike. This wasn't just about keeping the best hunting spots for the monarchy's enjoyment. It was a strategic move to assert dominance over the land and its people. The forests were not just lush expanses of greenery. They were economic assets, offering timber, game, and resources that could be taxed or leveraged in times of war. By controlling these areas, the crown could consolidate power, exert influence, and keep the nobility in check, because nothing says I'm in charge, like telling a duke he can't shoot a deer on his own land without a royal nod. But why the fuss over hunting? In a time when meat was a luxury, hunting was more than sport. It was a necessity and a privilege. The ability to hunt and eat game was a sign of wealth and status, with venison being the medieval equivalent of foie gras. And it wasn't just about the meat. The hunt was an elaborate social event, a chance for the nobility to flaunt their wealth, make alliances, and of course, show off their finest hunting attire. Think of it as the medieval version of a high society gala, complete with all the political maneuvering and social climbing. Speaking of exclusivity, the royal forests were like the VIP lounges of the medieval world. These were vast tracts of land that could span several counties and were reserved solely for the king and those he deemed worthy. And we're not talking a couple of acres here. Some of these forests were massive. Take the New Forest, for example, covering nearly 150 square miles. That's bigger than the city of Philadelphia. If you were part of the privileged few, an invitation to hunt in one of these areas was a golden ticket, a sign that you were in the king's good graces. Yet, the forest laws weren't just about keeping the common folk out. They were also a tool for controlling the nobility. By restricting who could hunt where, the crown could keep potential rivals in check and ensure loyalty. It was a delicate dance of power and politics, where the right to hunt could be both a reward and a leash. And heaven help you if you were caught poaching. The penalties were severe, ranging from crippling fines to mutilation, a little something to remember the king by. But let's not give all the credit to the monarchs. The nobility played their part in this hunting hierarchy, and the class dynamics were as tangled as the brambles in Sherwood Forest. The landed gentry, for instance, might have their own estates with hunting rights, but they still had to tread carefully. A slip-up could land them in hot water with the crown, or worse, on the receiving end of local rivalries. It was a world where alliances were as important as arrows, and the wrong move could see you out in the cold, literally and figuratively. And for those lower on the social ladder, hunting was a dicey affair. Poaching was rampant, driven by necessity as much as rebellion. For many peasants, the risk was worth it. After all, a successful hunt could mean the difference between a full belly and a hungry night. But the consequences could be dire, with punishments designed to deter even the most desperate. It's a testament to the harsh realities of medieval life, where survival often meant playing a dangerous game of cat and mouse with the authorities. In this tangled web of laws and loyalties, the hunt was a microcosm of medieval society itself. It was about power and privilege, survival and status, and the ever-present dance between those at the top and those struggling beneath. So, the next time you hear someone romanticize the medieval hunt, remember, beneath the pageantry and pomp lay a brutal system that dictated the lives of many and the fortunes of few. Quite the club membership, wouldn't you say? So, speaking of the medieval hunt, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of what it actually entailed. Forget about the image of a lone hunter with a trusty bow and arrow wandering through the forest. Hunting in medieval England was a full-blown production, akin to organizing a medieval coach-sheller, complete with all the pomp and circumstance. First off, the gear. This wasn't a simple grab-your-bow-and-go affair. No, this was a display of wealth and power, where your hunting kit said as much about your status as your family crest. For the nobility, the arsenal was extensive. Crossbows, longbows, spears, swords, and the piece de resistance, the hunting horn. The horn wasn't just for show. It was a vital communication tool, blasting signals across the forest, announcing the start of the hunt or rallying the troops. And these weren't your average horns. The fanciest came engraved with intricate designs, a testament to their owner's wealth. Then there were the clothes. Think less camouflage and more couture. The hunting attire was as much about style as it was about function. Velvet tunics, embroidered with gold thread, fur-lined cloaks, and hats adorned with feathers were de rigueur. This wasn't just to look good, though that was part of it. These outfits were designed to show off the wearer's wealth and rank, making sure everyone knew who was in charge of the chase. It's like showing up to a major gala in the latest designer fashion. You're there to make an impression. Now, let's talk about the entourage. No self-respecting noble would head into the forest alone. Hunting parties were massive affairs, involving dozens, sometimes hundreds of people. You had the huntsmen, the beaters, the poor souls tasked with driving the game out of hiding, falconers, and a small army of servants to cater to every need. Add to that a pack of hounds specially bred and trained for the hunt, and you've got a rolling medieval circus. And this wasn't some spontaneous, let's go hunt a deer moment. Oh no, plans were made months in advance. Routes were mapped, forest conditions assessed, and logistics coordinated to ensure everything went off without a hitch. It was like planning a military campaign rather than a day out in the woods. But let's not forget the rituals. Yes, medieval hunting was steeped in tradition, with rituals that seemed more suited to a cult than a country pursuit. Take, for instance, the ceremonial unmaking of the deer. After a successful hunt, the deer's carcass was processed in a highly ritualized manner, a demonstration of skill and respect for the animal. This was no mere butchering. It was a public event, with the spoils being distributed according to rank. The best cuts went to the highest-ranking members of the party, while the rest trickled down the social ladder. Talk about a literal pecking order. Now, you might think that all this pageantry was just for show, but there was a practical side to it too. The rituals and traditions surrounding the hunt served to reinforce social hierarchies and bonds. They were opportunities for the nobility to network, forge alliances, and display their wealth and power. In a world where reputation was everything, a well-executed hunt could boost a noble's standing or tarnish it if things went awry. But let's debunk a common myth here. The idea of the noble savage, the lord of the manor as a rugged, self-sufficient woodsman. In reality, the nobility were less Bear Grylls and more Downton Abbey. They didn't get their hands dirty. There were peasants and servants for that. The noble's role was to lead, to strategize, and ultimately to enjoy the fruits of others' labor. And speaking of labor, let's not forget the economic impact of a successful hunt. For the nobility, a hunt could fill the larders, provide gifts for allies, and ensure a steady supply of meat. For the peasants, however, the stakes were much higher. A successful hunt could mean the difference between hunger and survival, especially during lean times. But the risks were equally high. Poaching, as we've mentioned, was a dangerous game, but sometimes the only option for those living on the margins. In this way, the hunt was more than just sport or spectacle. It was an economic engine, a means of reinforcing power structures, and a reflection of the broader societal dynamics at play. It was a world where the thrill of the chase was matched only by the complexity of the dance between classes, where the romance of the hunt masked a gritty reality. And as we continue this journey through medieval hunting, remember, behind the glamour and the grandeur, there was a harsh truth, a world where every arrow loosed was a reminder of the delicate balance between privilege and survival. Now, as we dive deeper into the economic underbelly of medieval hunting, let's strip away the glamour and get down to brass tacks. Maintaining those grand hunting grounds wasn't a cheap affair. Imagine owning a car today. It's not just the sticker price, it's the constant upkeep that really hits the wallet. Similarly, the cost of maintaining hunting preserves was a royal headache, both figuratively and financially. We're talking about land management that required a small army of foresters, gamekeepers, and a veritable platoon of workers to keep everything in tip-top shape. This wasn't a weekend hobby for a medieval lord. It was a full-time job. Now, why go to all this trouble? Because, my dear listeners, hunting was not just some medieval Netflix binge watch. It was an economic juggernaut. The forests were not just pretty backdrops for noble escapades. They were cash cows. The revenue from a well-managed hunting ground could be significant, helping to fill the coffers of the crown or the local lord. But let's not kid ourselves. It was the venison that really brought home the bacon, or in this case, the deer. Venison was the culinary gold of the medieval world. Think of it as the Kobe beef of its day, prized and savored at the tables of the elite. It wasn't just food. It was a status symbol, a way to show off your wealth and connections. Imagine serving up roast venison at your medieval banquet. It was like saying, I'm so well connected, even the deer are dying to be on my plate. The demand for venison was high, and those who controlled the supply chain were sitting on a veritable gold mine. But let's not forget the business side of hunting. The selling and trading of game, particularly venison, was a lucrative business. It was common for nobles to sell part of their catch to local markets or even export it to other regions. This was a time when locally sourced wasn't just a trendy buzzword but a necessity. Transportation was no easy feat. Imagine getting a wagon full of freshly hunted venison across medieval roads. Not the smoothest ride, I assure you. Yet, despite the bumps and bruises, the venison trade thrived, bolstered by a burgeoning market for high-quality, high-status meat. Speaking of high status, let's talk about the taxation angle. The right to hunt, and by extension, manage these lands, often came with strings attached. You didn't just get to frolic in the forest for free. Oh no, the crown made sure to get its cut. Land taxes and fees for hunting rights could be hefty, making sure the sovereign always had a piece of the action. It was like a medieval subscription service. Want to keep hunting? Better pay up. And just like today, nobody was thrilled about taxes, but they were an unavoidable part of the game. But it wasn't all bad news for the little guy. While hunting was largely the domain of the elite, the economic ripple effect reached far and wide. Local economies benefited from the hunting seasons, with increased demand for services and goods. Remember those massive hunting parties? They needed supplies, food, clothing, equipment, giving a boost to local merchants and craftsmen. And let's not forget the taverns, where a good hunt was always celebrated with an even better ale. Now, here's where we debunk a bit of the romanticism. The image of the noble hunter, a solitary figure communing with nature, is pure fantasy. In truth, the hunt was a business, and like any business, it was about power and profit. The forests, those serene expanses of green, were battlegrounds for economic and political control. Owning hunting rights wasn't just about the thrill of the chase. It was about consolidating power, exerting influence, and ensuring your place in the social hierarchy. And speaking of hierarchy, let's address the medieval equivalent of foodies. Yes, even back then, people loved to talk about their food. Banquets were an opportunity to showcase not just culinary prowess, but also the fruits of one's hunting success. Imagine a feast where each dish tells a story, a tale of skill, wealth, and social standing. The more exotic the game, the more impressive the host. In this culinary arms race, venison was the trump card, a dish that spoke volumes about the hunter's prowess and the host's connections. But it wasn't just about impressing the guests. The consumption of game meat was deeply tied to the social fabric of medieval life. Feasts were where alliances were forged, deals were struck, and power was displayed. They were the LinkedIn of the medieval world. where who you ate with was as important as what you ate. And in this world, the hunt was both a literal and metaphorical table where the game of thrones was played out. So, as we continue to unravel the layers of medieval hunting, remember, beneath the allure of the hunt lies a complex web of economics, politics, and social maneuvering. It was a world where the chase was as much about power and profit as it was about skill and sport. And as we move forward, let's keep our eyes on the prize. The venison may have been the star of the show, but it was the game behind the game that truly defined the medieval hunt. Now that we've carved up the venison pie, it's time to hunt down the political beasts lurking in the medieval underbrush. Hunting in medieval England wasn't just an extravagant pastime. It was a strategic game of chess played with bows and arrows. Imagine the most exclusive club where your membership wasn't just about wealth, but about who you knew, and more importantly, who you could influence. Welcome to the medieval hunting party, where alliances were as carefully crafted as the finest longbows, and every hunt could be a precursor to a handshake or a backstab. Let's talk about boar hunts. These were the medieval equivalent of a high-stakes poker game, where kings and nobles played for power and prestige under the guise of sport. The boar wasn't just a beast to be slain, it was a political pawn. Take the Treaty of Windsor in 1175 between King Henry Roman II of England and Rory O'Connor, the High King of Ireland. The deal was reportedly sealed over a hunt, with the two leaders hashing out terms while in pursuit of the wild boar. This wasn't just about the thrill of the chase. It was about territorial rights and the control of Ireland. It's as if the fate of nations hinged on who could bag the biggest pig. And let's not forget the social ladder. A noble invitation to a royal hunt was akin to being handed the keys to the kingdom, or at least a seat at the royal table. These hunts were diplomatic missions wrapped in adventure, where the guest list was as exclusive as a modern-day state dinner. Making the cut meant you were in the king's favor, a sign that your political star was on the rise. It was all about who you rubbed elbows with as much as who you could outpace in the forest. Yet the line between diplomacy and deception was as thin as a feathered arrow. Just ask King William Roman II, also known as William Rufus, whose mysterious death during a hunting expedition in the New Forest in 1100 AD reads like a medieval whodunit. Was it an accident, or was there foul play at work? Some say an errant arrow from Walter Tile, a nobleman, was to blame, while others whisper of a calculated political assassination. What better way to eliminate a rival than under the guise of a hunting mishap? It's a reminder that in the tangled woods of politics, the real game was survival. And speaking of games, hunting was also a battleground for influence. The powerful Earl of Warwick, known as the Kingmaker during the Wars of the Roses, used hunting as a means to gather support and tighten alliances. His legendary hunts were not just for sport, but were strategic gatherings to cement his political network. It was as if the real trophies weren't the animals, but the allegiances formed around the campfire. But let's sharpen our focus on the economic undertones. A successful hunt fed more than just the body. It fed the political machine. The spoils of the hunt were not merely consumed, but used as currency in the ever-shifting landscape of medieval power. A gifted stag could be a peace offering, a token of goodwill that spoke louder than any parchment treaty. It was a tangible sign of friendship or submission, and in a world where trust was as rare as a white hart, such gestures could pave the way to peace or war. Now, here's where we debunk some myths. We often think of these hunting expeditions as testosterone-filled escapades, but women, too, played their part. Queens and noblewomen were not mere spectators. They wielded influence and engaged in the hunt to forge relationships and assert their status. Elena of Aquitaine, for instance, was known for her hunting prowess and used it as a platform to demonstrate her political acumen. Her participation was more than just symbolic. It was a statement of power in a male-dominated arena. But the romance of the hunt. It's easy to get swept up in the thrill of the chase, the camaraderie of the hunt, but the harsh reality was a political arena as cutthroat as any battlefield. Behind every boar hunt and deer chase lay a web of machinations, a dance of power where one misstep could lead to ruin. The hunt was a mirror reflecting the medieval world, beautiful and brutal, where allegiances could turn with the wind, and the line between friend and foe was as murky as a forest mist. As we gallop through this historical landscape, remember, The politics of medieval hunting were as complex and cunning as the strategies of war. It was a world where the chase was both literal and metaphorical, and every arrow loosed could shape the destiny of nations. So, strap on your quiver and stay sharp, for the game is far from over, and there are still plenty of wild tales left to hunt. And so, as the medieval hunting party disbands, and the echoes of the past begin to fade, we turn our gaze to what came next. The transition from medieval to modern hunting wasn't exactly a leap, but more of a slow, deliberate shuffle. As the centuries rolled on, hunting evolved from a grand stage of political intrigue and social posturing into something a bit more recreational. But don't be fooled. Even as the royal forests became more accessible and the rules less draconian, the hunt retained its air of prestige and mystique. Take the 17th century, for instance, when the English aristocracy still fancied themselves as nature's own aristocrats. Fox hunting became the new rage, essentially a rural roller coaster ride that combined the excitement of the chase with the thrill of social climbing. In a world where foxes were the new deer, the elaborate rituals and the conspicuous display of wealth endured. Ever wonder why those red hunting coats became a thing? It was all about visibility, my friend, both to the quarry and to your fellow hunters. Let's just say it wasn't the foxes who needed to be impressed. Yet, as society industrialized, hunting began to lose its exclusive edge. The rise of the middle class in the 19th century brought about a seismic shift in who could participate. Suddenly, hunting wasn't just for kings and their lackeys. It was for the gentleman farmer and the aspiring entrepreneur. The democratization of hunting was a harbinger of social change, where the barriers of class began to crumble under the weight of progress. And while the hunt became more accessible, the romantic fantasy lived on, fueled by literature and art that glorified the noble pursuit of the chase. Speaking of literature, let's not forget the impact of Sir Walter Scott and his ilk, whose novels painted hunting in lush, romantic hues. The rugged hunter emerged as a beacon of masculinity, a bastion of tradition in an ever-modernizing world. This narrative, though largely fictional, struck a chord, embedding itself in the cultural psyche. The image of the lone woodsman, one with nature, became a symbol of independence and prowess, even as the reality was often more about societal norms and less about personal freedom. Fast forward to today, and you'll find that hunting still holds a peculiar place in society. Despite the rise of animal rights movements and a growing awareness of conservation, hunting persists, not merely as a sport, but as a cultural touchstone. In the U.S., for example, hunting seasons are as anticipated as any holiday, with millions participating each year. In 2020 alone, over 15 million Americans held hunting licenses, a testament to the enduring appeal of the chase. But why does this ancient pastime still resonate? Partly, it's the call of the wild, an escape from the digital din into a world where skill and patience still matter. But it's also about identity, a link to a past where hunting was a rite of passage, a proving ground for the brave and the bold. The rituals may have changed, but the essence remains, a dance of power, skill, and let's be honest, a fair bit of bravado. Yet let's debunk a lingering myth, the idea that hunting is a relic of the past, a tradition clinging to its last breath. In truth, the hunt has adapted, morphing into a modern pastime that balances tradition with technology. Today's hunters may not wield longbows, but they are no less dedicated. Their gear a testament to innovation rather than antiquity. GPS systems, high-tech scopes, and specialized camouflage are the new tools of the trade, a reminder that even age-old traditions evolve with the times. However, the romanticism of hunting often glosses over its more controversial aspects. Conservationists argue that hunting, when managed responsibly, plays a vital role in wildlife management, controlling populations to prevent overgrazing and habitat destruction. In countries like Namibia and Zimbabwe, controlled trophy hunting has been used to fund conservation efforts and support local communities, a complex dance of ethics and economics where the stakes are as high as ever. So, what does this all tell us? That hunting, with its tangled roots in economy, politics, and culture, is a mirror reflecting our own evolution. It's a testament to humanity's ability to adapt and endure, to find meaning in tradition even as we march toward the future. The legacy of the medieval hunt is both a cautionary tale and a celebration. a reminder of the power dynamics that shaped our world and the enduring allure of the untamed. In wrapping up, let's raise a glass, or perhaps a hunting horn, to the legacy of the hunt, a multifaceted narrative of power, survival, and identity. It's a story that has traversed centuries, leaving a trail of myths and realities that continue to captivate and confound. As we close this chapter, remember, the hunt is more than just a chase. It's a journey into the heart of who we are and who we strive to become. And as long as there are woods to wander and challenges to meet, the spirit of the hunt will endure, a timeless testament to our shared history and humanity. Ever marveled at how our ancestors managed to make art that could fit in your pocket? Enter the enchanting, yet slightly perplexing world of Persian miniature painting, where artists turn the epic into the microscopic with a flair that would make modern-day social media influencers green with envy. These elaborate little masterpieces, usually no bigger than a medium-sized coffee cup lid, around 30 cm max, were the 13th century equivalent of scrolling through a vibrant Instagram feed, where every brushstroke told a story and every pigment was worth its weight in gold. Literally. Let's set the scene. It's the 1200, and the Mongols have just had their way with much of Asia. They didn't just bring destruction, they also carried with them a treasure trove of cultural influences that would meld into the Persian art scene. Persian miniature painting was born from this cultural cocktail, emerging as a unique blend of Persian, Chinese, and Islamic artistry. It was like the Renaissance before the Renaissance, a melting pot of artistic expression, minus the European drama and excessive use of cherubs. Now, here's a fun fact to chew on. The materials used in these miniatures were about as expensive as having a year's worth of avocado toast delivered to your door daily. The artists didn't just waltz into a craft store for their supplies. Oh no, they sourced pigments that could cost as much as a year's rent in some parts of the world even today. Ultramarine, made from lapis lazuli, had to be imported all the way from Afghanistan. That's a 3,000 km trek just to get your hands on a particular shade of blue. Talk about commitment to the craft. In these tiny canvases, you'd find everything from romantic picnics under lush Persian skies to epic battles that made Game of Thrones look like a mild disagreement over the TV remote. These images weren't just decorative, they were narrative powerhouses, capturing the essence of Persian culture, politics, and religion with a finesse that could rival any modern-day photojournalist. The level of detail was so meticulous that you'd need a magnifying glass to fully appreciate the artistry, sort of like trying to read the fine print on an iTunes user agreement, but a lot more rewarding. And let's not forget the artists. These weren't just any old painters, they were the rock stars of their day. Think of them as the Beatles of the brush, revered and commissioned by the elite to immortalize their grandeur and exploits. The demand was high, and the competition was fierce. In a way, they were the original content creators, vying for attention and patronage in a landscape where artistic talent was as much a social currency as it was a creative expression. While it's tempting to romanticize these miniature paintings as a quaint relic of the past, the reality was much more complex. They were a testament to an era of cross-cultural pollination, a time when art was a universal language spoken in vivid colors and intricate patterns. Yet they also reflected the societal hierarchies and economic disparities of their time. The common folk probably didn't have a say in what got painted, much less the means to afford such luxuries. These miniatures were, after all, a pastime and possession of the elite, a visual diary of the 1%. So, the next time you scroll through your social media feed, think of those Persian miniatures as the original status updates. They captured the vibrancy of life in a way that was both timeless and transient, much like our own digital snapshots today. The difference: their stories have lasted nearly a millennium, while our latest selfie might not even make it past the next algorithm update. And speaking of those original status updates, let's dive into the reality TV of the Persian art world, where the artists and patrons were the stars of a saga filled with intrigue, rivalry, and the occasional scandalous brushstroke. Picture the bustling workshops of Isfahan or Tabriz during the Safavid dynasty, where art wasn't just a pastime, it was the front line of cultural warfare. The Safavid rulers, those illustrious patrons of the arts, had a flair for turning sponsorship into a competitive sport. Imagine a reality show where instead of vying for a rose, contestants battled for the coveted title of the Shah's favorite painter. It's like The Bachelor, but with less cringeworthy confessions and more exquisite strokes of ultramarine. These patrons weren't just throwing coins at any painter with a brush. They were investing in cultural capital. Let's talk economics, shall we? In the 16th century, being a patron wasn't just about philanthropy. It was a strategic move to cement one's status and influence. It was like owning a private jet today. If you had a stable of talented miniaturists, you were essentially flexing your cultural biceps. The Safavid rulers, like Shah Abbas, didn't just want pretty pictures. They wanted visual manifestos that reflected their political power and divine right to rule. So, they funded workshops that were akin to today's high-end art studios, buzzing with creative energy and a hint of competitive tension. These workshops were like the open-plan offices of their day, albeit with a lot more incense and a bit less existential dread. Imagine rows of artists hunched over manuscripts, each contributing their specialty to a single piece. One artist would handle the intricate borders, another the vivid landscapes, and yet another would focus on the human figures, each as essential as the other, like cogs in a well-oiled machine. It's a bit like your favorite band, where the drummer might not get the spotlight, but is crucial to the magic. But here's the kicker. Many of these artists were more like anonymous ghostwriters than celebrity painters. Sure, the rock stars of the brush like Bayezid might have hogged the limelight, but countless others toiled in obscurity. Talk about a plot twist. These unsung heroes were the backbone of the art scene, creating masterpieces that would never bear their individual names. It's like being an intern at a big tech company. Your work powers the machine, but don't expect a personal shout-out at the shareholders' meeting. And then there were the political pressures. Oh, the delightful stress of creating art under the watchful eyes of power-hungry rulers. Imagine painting a serene landscape while worrying that a misplaced tree might offend a noble sensibilities. It was a high-stakes game of artistic expression, where one had to balance creativity with the ever-present threat of displeasing those who held the purse strings. The economic realities were no joke, either. These artists weren't exactly rolling in gold coins. In fact, many were reliant on the whims of their patrons for their livelihood. If the Shah decided he was more into calligraphy this season, well, tough luck for the miniature painters. It's like finding out your freelance gig is over because your client decided to get into NFTs instead. Yet, despite these challenges, the allure of Persian miniatures persisted, a testament to their enduring appeal. The romantic myth of the solitary genius painter is just that, a myth. The reality was a collaborative effort, a symphony of talents orchestrated to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Every brushstroke was a note in a grand composition, a visual ode to the complexities of Persian society and the intricate dance between art and power. So, remember this the next time you marvel at a Persian miniature. Behind every masterpiece was a team of dedicated artists, a shrewd patron with a political agenda, and a world of economic and social dynamics that would make any modern art dealer nod in understanding. The legacy of these artists, both celebrated and anonymous, is a reminder that while the limelight might capture the few, the shadows hold the true artisans of history. Stay tuned, because we're just getting started on this artistic journey, and there's a lot more to uncover. As we dive deeper into the Persian miniature painting scene, let's get our hands dirty with the nitty-gritty details. And by dirty, I mean quite literally, since some of the materials used were as toxic as a bad relationship. Take cinnabar, for instance, a vibrant red pigment that was all the rage, made from mercury sulfide. Yes, you heard that right, mercury. The same stuff your parents warned you about in old thermometers. Artists would handle this lethal pigment like a chef handling a delicate soufflé, all to achieve that lush red hue that screamed opulence, albeit with a side of potential poisoning. But hey, art is pain, right? In this case, quite literally. Beyond cinnabar, there was the dazzling ultramarine, sourced from lapis lazuli, which was mined in the mountains of Afghanistan. This was no run-of-the-mill blue. It was the blue. The rock had to be pulverized and painstakingly processed to produce the pigment, making it more valuable than gold. We're talking a 3,000 km trek over treacherous terrain just to get a pinch of this precious stuff. It was the ultimate status symbol, like a vintage Rolex, but for your manuscript. And let's not forget the yellows. Saffron was not just for spicing up your biryani, it was also for spicing up your miniatures. The labor-intensive process of harvesting saffron made it as costly as a weekend getaway to the Amalfi Coast. These yellows were the 16th century equivalent of luxury branding. A splash of saffron was like flaunting a designer handbag in every painted scene. Now, here's a little secret about these pigments. Some of them were made using the crushed bodies of insects. Yes, cochineal bugs, to be precise. This crimson dye, carmine, was a favorite for its vibrant hue, and was as exotic as it was gruesome. Picture artists meticulously squashing these tiny creatures to extract their color. It's a bit like your favorite smoothie recipe taking a dark, insect-laden turn. But why go to such lengths for these colors? It wasn't just about aesthetics. These pigments were political tools, a means of asserting dominance and divine right. The brighter and more vibrant the colors, the greater the statement. It was visual one-upmanship at its finest, a silent but powerful way to say, I'm richer and more powerful than you. And here's where we bust a myth. Were these vibrant scenes really depictions of paradise, or were they just clever PR for royal families? Spoiler alert, it's a bit of both. While the myth of the idyllic paradise is tempting, these paintings were often more about propaganda than pastoral bliss. The lush gardens and grand palaces depicted might have been as real as a unicorn. These were idealized visions crafted to boost the prestige of their patrons, not unlike a politician's heavily filtered Instagram feed today. One could argue that Persian miniatures were the original influencers, curating images that spoke volumes about their patrons' wealth and power. But don't let that spoil the magic. After all, who doesn't love a good story, even if it's embellished? The allure of these miniatures lies in their duality, both a romantic glimpse into a lost world and a sharp reminder of the societal hierarchies that shape them. Now, let's talk technique. Creating a Persian miniature was no slapdash affair. It required precision that would make a brain surgeon sweat. Artists used fine brushes made from squirrel hair. Yes, squirrel hair, allowing them to capture details so intricate that you'd think they had a magnifying glass for an eye. The paper itself was often burnished to a glossy sheen, allowing the colors to pop like a fireworks show on a crisp night. Layer upon layer of paint was applied, each waiting for its predecessor to dry before the next could be laid down. It was a patience game, a test of endurance and skill, as artists brought to life not just scenes but stories, each brushstroke a chapter in a grand narrative. The result was a visual symphony, a kaleidoscope of color that danced across the page, captivating the viewer's imagination. Yet behind this beauty lay the hard truths of a demanding profession. The artists often worked under immense pressure, balancing creativity with the demands of their patrons. One wrong move, one tiny error in judgment, and their livelihood could come crashing down like a house of cards. It was a high-stakes world, where the brush was both a tool of creation and a sword of Damocles, hanging precariously overhead. So, what do we take from this? That the world of Persian miniatures was as complex as the colors they used, brilliant, beguiling, and at times brutal. These paintings are windows into a world where art was both an exaltation and a burden, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. As we continue this journey into the realm of Persian art, keep these truths in mind. There's more to explore, more myths to debunk, and more stories to uncover. Stay tuned, because the saga is far from over. As we continue our epic journey through the mesmerizing world of Persian miniatures, let's embark on a little detour, a cultural road trip, if you will. Our first stop, the bustling Silk Roads of history, where these miniatures weren't just local celebrities, but rather global influencers, making their way from the vibrant courts of Persia to the far-flung corners of Asia and Europe. Picture this. It's the 14th century, and these tiny masterpieces are being packed up with the same care you'd use to wrap a Fabergé egg. They're about to be shipped off as the ultimate diplomatic swag, exchanged between empires like the medieval equivalent of a blue checkmark on social media. Forget your run-of-the-mill fruit basket. These miniatures were the gifts that screamed, I'm cultured, and I know it. They were the art world's answer to a mixtape. But instead of love ballads, they were filled with political undertones and cultural bragging points. Enter the Timurid Empire, a dynasty with a penchant for Persian culture, which didn't just keep these miniatures to themselves. They were far too magnificent for that. As Timur's descendants expanded their influence, they took these diminutive artworks along for the ride, spreading them like cultural confetti from Samarkand to the courts of China and beyond. They were like the Beatles of the art world, crossing borders and leaving a trail of awestruck admirers in their wake. But it wasn't just the Asian empires getting a taste of Persian artistry. These miniatures also made their way to Europe, where they became a sensation among the Renaissance elite who were already knee-deep in their own artistic revolution. Now, there's a tale that floats around about a certain lost Persian miniature that supposedly inspired none other than Albrecht Dürer, the German Renaissance master. Legend has it that Dürer stumbled upon this little gem during his travels and was so taken by its detail and vibrancy that it influenced his own work, particularly his foray into printmaking. Whether this story holds water or is just another romantic notion is up for debate, but it certainly adds a dash of intrigue to Dürer's artistic journey. Now, before we get too carried away with this storybook narrative, let's pump the brakes and scrutinize the facts. Because, let's face it, history loves a good yarn, but it also loves its cold, hard truths. The idea that a single Persian miniature could have single-handedly sparked a creative epiphany in Dürer is as tantalizing as it is unlikely. The reality is more nuanced. These artworks were more like the cherry on top of an already burgeoning artistic exchange between East and West. They didn't reinvent the wheel, they simply added a dazzling new spoke to it. Yet, it's undeniable that Persian miniatures played a role in this cultural exchange. They were the artistic ambassadors, bridging gaps between civilizations and showing the world that art transcends language and geography. They were like diplomatic passports, carrying stories and symbols across borders, sometimes as subtle propaganda, other times as blatant political overtures. Consider the savvy rulers who sent these miniatures as gifts to European courts, a move that was less about admiration for foreign art and more about strategic signaling. It was a way to say, look at what we can create, imagine what else we can do. It was soft power wrapped in a beautiful frame, an early form of brand building where the brand was an entire empire. And just like any good gift, these miniatures came with strings attached. They were often sent with the hope of securing alliances or favorable trade agreements, and in some cases they were used to smooth over diplomatic wrinkles. Think of them as the 15th century version of sending a fruit basket to a disgruntled client, but with a lot more artistic flair and a smidge of political cunning. So, what does this tell us about the world of Persian miniatures? That they weren't just pretty pictures to be admired from afar. They were active participants in the geopolitical chess game of their time. Behind each brushstroke lay a strategic vision, as intricate as the patterns within the artwork itself. They were both mirrors and makers of history, reflecting the complex dance of diplomacy and power that defined their era. As we continue to peel back the layers of this artistic onion, remember that these miniatures were more than just cultural curiosities. They were the silent storytellers of their time, weaving tales of ambition, artistry, and alliances in ways both subtle and striking. And while the legends surrounding them may sometimes blur the lines between fact and fiction, their impact on the world stage remains crystal clear. So, as we prepare to explore further, keep in mind that in the realm of Persian miniatures, art wasn't just an expression, it was an extension of influence. And the stories these paintings tell, whether true, embellished, or somewhere in between, continue to captivate and challenge us, inviting us to see the world through a lens as vivid and intricate as the miniatures themselves. Stay tuned, because our journey is far from over, and the best is yet to come. And speaking of the best, let's fast forward to the 21st century, where Persian miniatures have taken a wild leap from the dusty shelves of history right onto your digital screen. That's right, folks. These tiny masterpieces have found new life in the vast, never-sleeping world of social media. Who would have thought that an art form that once required a magnifying glass to fully appreciate would become the darling of Instagram and TikTok? It's like watching your great-grandparents become viral sensations overnight. Here's the scoop. The hashtag #PersianMiniature has amassed thousands of posts, with artists and enthusiasts from Tehran to Tokyo sharing their takes on this ancient art form. What was once the exclusive domain of royal patrons and elite connoisseurs is now just a thumb swipe away. And don't be fooled. These aren't mere replicas of classic works. Modern miniaturists are breathing new life into the tradition blending centuries-old techniques with cheeky, contemporary twists. Think epic battles featuring pop culture icons or romantic picnics under skies filled with emojis instead of stars. It's like history met a meme, and they decided to collaborate. Now, before you dismiss this as a fleeting trend, consider the economic and social factors at play. The resurgence of interest in Persian miniatures isn't just about aesthetics. It's about cultural pride, heritage, and a bit of clever branding. In today's globalized world, where everyone is vying for a unique identity, what's more distinctive than reviving an art form that dates back to the 13th century? It's the ultimate flex, a way to say, our culture has been creating eye-popping content since before your ancestors were doodling stick figures. And here's where we debunk the myth of extinction. The narrative that Persian miniatures faded into obscurity is as exaggerated as a Hollywood blockbuster plot. The art form didn't vanish, it evolved. Sure, the grand workshops of Isfahan may not be buzzing with the same fervor as during the Safavid dynasty, but the spirit of the miniature is alive and well. Artists today are not just preserving the tradition, they're transforming it, much like how vinyl records are making a comeback among audiophiles who swear by their superior sound quality. It's less about nostalgia and more about rediscovering what made these miniatures so compelling in the first place. Their detail, their storytelling, and their ability to capture the imagination. And speaking of detail, let's not forget the painstaking craftsmanship that goes into each piece. Modern miniaturists may have access to synthetic pigments and digital tools, but the essence of the craft remains unchanged. It still requires the patience of a saint and the precision of a neurosurgeon, wielding brushes that make a ballpoint pen look like a log. In a world where instant gratification is the norm, these artists are the rebels, reminding us that sometimes the devil or the divine is in the details. So, what's the takeaway from all this? That Persian miniatures, much like history itself, are all about the nuance. They may be small in size, but their impact is anything but. They remind us that art is both a reflection and a shaper of society, capable of bridging centuries and cultures with a single, well-placed brushstroke. They're a testament to human creativity and resilience, proving that while trends may come and go, true artistry is timeless. And as we wrap up this whirlwind tour of Persian miniatures, let's leave with a nod to the artists who make it all possible. Whether they're painting under the patronage of a 16th century Shah or posting their work for likes and shares, they're part of a grand tradition that values both skill and storytelling. They remind us that history, much like a good miniature, is all about the details, the tiny moments that, when pieced together, create a masterpiece. So next time you find yourself scrolling through your feed, pause for a moment when you see a Persian miniature. Appreciate the lineage, the labor, and the love that goes into each piece. Because in the vast tapestry of art history, these miniatures are the intricate threads that hold it all together, proving that sometimes the smallest things have the biggest stories to tell. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was born into a world that expected women to be as silent as they were invisible, yet she found her voice amidst the rustle of law books and the bustling streets of Johnstown, New York. The year was 1815, and the United States was still figuring out what it wanted to be when it grew up. Elizabeth, however, seemed to know exactly who she was from the start. Her cradle was rocked not just by the lullabies of a family home, but by the whispers of revolution and reform, a peculiar soundtrack for a young girl in the early 19th century. Elizabeth's father, Daniel Cady, was a prominent lawyer and a judge, a man who seemingly loved the law almost as much as he loved his family. It was through his eyes that Elizabeth first glimpsed the glaring inequities of the time. Her father's law library became her personal Hogwarts, minus the magic wands and broomsticks, where she devoured legal texts like a kid with an unlimited candy voucher. In those dusty tomes, she discovered an astonishing truth. Women had the legal rights of, well, livestock. It was a rude awakening, like finding coal in your Christmas stocking when you've been promised toys. Elizabeth's mother, Margaret Livingston Cady, was more traditional, fitting the image of a proper woman of her time. Yet, she had the good sense to encourage Elizabeth's education, a rare luxury for girls in the 1820. While many of her peers were learning the fine art of needlepoint and the subtleties of curtsying, Elizabeth was busy tackling Greek and Latin at the Johnstown Academy. She wasn't just breaking the mold, She was shattering it with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for rock stars smashing guitars. In 1826, when Elizabeth was just 11, a tragedy struck that would shape her perspective forever. Her older brother, Eleazar, died suddenly, and her father, mourning his favored son, told Elizabeth that he wished she had been a boy. Now, if that isn't a plot twist straight out of a soap opera, I don't know what is. But instead of letting this gendered slight define her, Elizabeth used it as fuel. "I'll show you, Dad," she must have thought, as she continued to excel academically and intellectually, defying the social norms that would have her sit pretty and silent. Her father's library wasn't just a place for reading. It was a war room where Elizabeth plotted her rebellion against society's expectations. She learned about property rights, or rather, the lack of them for women. She discovered that a married woman essentially became a legal shadow of her husband, with fewer rights than a domesticated pet. This legal invisibility was as absurd as it was infuriating, and it lit a fire in Elizabeth that never went out. Now, there's a myth about the Cady family being progressive trailblazers, and while they were certainly forward-thinking by the standards of the day, let's not get carried away. Daniel Cady, for all his intellectual brilliance, was a product of his time. He didn't exactly hand Elizabeth the keys to the feminist kingdom. Instead, he provided the environment where her revolutionary ideas could incubate, like some kind of proto-feminist greenhouse. It was Elizabeth's own tenacity and curiosity that turned those seeds into a full-blown movement. By the time Elizabeth reached adulthood, she had already begun to question the world around her with the kind of fervor usually reserved for teenage angst. She saw the world as a place ripe for change, and she was determined to be the catalyst. Her education, her father's legal library, and the personal tragedies she endured had all converged to create a formidable force of nature, one that was about to shake the foundations of societal norms like a snow globe in the hands of an overzealous child. So, there you have it. The early years of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, a woman who was never content to be a footnote in someone else's story. From the moment she opened her first law book, she was writing her own narrative, one that would eventually include a significant chapter in the fight for women's rights. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning of a tale that proves truth is not only stranger than fiction, but infinitely more inspiring. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was just warming up, from poring over law books in her father's library to diving headfirst into the swirling currents of social reform. She was about to embark on a journey that would shake the foundations of societal norms. Fast forward to 1848, and we find Elizabeth on the brink of orchestrating one of the most pivotal moments in the fight for women's rights, the Seneca Falls Convention. Now, let's get one thing straight. The Seneca Falls Convention wasn't some grand, meticulously planned event with PR teams and social media campaigns. Oh no, it was more like a last-minute barbecue thrown together by a group of friends who realized they had something important to say. Elizabeth, along with Lucretia Mott and a handful of other trailblazers, whipped up the whole affair in just 5 days. 5 days. That's less time than it takes most of us to plan a weekend getaway. The location, a quaint Wesleyan chapel in Seneca Falls, New York. The irony, delicious. A religious venue hosting a radical convention that sought to challenge the very religious and societal norms that had kept women in metaphorical shackles for centuries. Talk about flipping the script. It was like holding a rock concert in a library, unexpected, a bit irreverent, and bound to make some noise. On July 19 and 20, 1848, the convention opened its doors to around 300 women and men, a crowd that was both eager and skeptical. Elizabeth and her co-conspirators, if you will, presented the Declaration of Sentiments, a document so revolutionary could have had its own theme song. Modeled after the Declaration of Independence, it boldly declared that all men and women are created equal. It was a mic drop moment that echoed through the chapel's rafters, despite being met with a mix of applause and gasps. The Declaration of Sentiments laid out 12 resolutions, all aimed at dismantling the oppressive structures that treated women as second-class citizens. It tackled issues ranging from women's suffrage to the right to own property and receive an education. The document was a laundry list of grievances that Elizabeth had been keeping in her metaphorical back pocket for years. and she wasn't about to let it collect dust any longer. The myth here is that everyone in attendance was immediately on board with the radical ideas being proposed. Not quite. While the convention was a groundbreaking success, it also faced its fair share of detractors. Some attendees were hesitant to sign the declaration, fearing backlash and social ostracism. Others believed that the resolutions went a tad too far, like asking for too many toppings on a pizza. But Elizabeth was unyielding. She argued passionately, using her razor-sharp intellect and fiery oratory skills to win people over, one resolution at a time. Economic realities also played a significant role in shaping the demands of the convention. In the mid-19th century, the United States was rapidly industrializing, and women were increasingly entering the workforce. Yet, they were paid a fraction of what their male counterparts earned, and had little to no legal protection. The Declaration of Sentiments wasn't just a wish list. It was a response to the economic injustices of the time. Elizabeth understood that true equality had to include financial independence, a radical notion that was as necessary as it was disruptive. Let's bust another myth, shall we? The Seneca Falls Convention didn't instantly transform society or grant women their rights in a neat, Hollywood-style montage. It was, instead, the first pebble in what would become an avalanche of social change. The convention sparked a movement that would take decades, nay, over a century, to achieve some of its goals. Women's suffrage wouldn't become a reality until 1920, a full 72 years after Elizabeth and her allies first put pen to paper. And what about the men in the room? While some were supportive, others were apprehensive. Frederick Douglass, the renowned abolitionist, was a notable ally who attended the convention and lent his voice to the cause. His presence underscored the intersectionality of the struggle for equality, a concept that was as relevant then as it is today. Douglass understood that the fight for women's rights was inextricably linked to the broader battle for human rights, a connection that Elizabeth was keen to emphasize. As the convention wrapped up, Elizabeth must have felt a mix of triumph and trepidation. She knew this was only the beginning. The Seneca Falls Convention was a spark, but the fire it ignited needed tending. Elizabeth and her compatriots left the chapel not with a sense of closure, but with a sense of purpose. They were armed with a manifesto and the determination to rewrite the rules of society, one rally, one speech, and one signature at a time. The Seneca Falls Convention of 1848 was a seismic event, not because it immediately changed the world, but because it laid the groundwork for future generations of activists. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, with her unrelenting resolve and visionary spirit, had taken a significant step toward the world she envisioned, a world where equality wasn't just a lofty ideal, but a tangible reality. And while the road ahead was long and fraught with challenges, the path had been cleared. The movement was underway, and Elizabeth was ready to lead the charge wherever it might take her. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over, and the best is yet to come. As Elizabeth Cady Stanton stepped out of the Wesleyan Chapel, she likely felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, but also the invigorating rush that comes from knowing you've just made history. The Seneca Falls Convention had sparked a flame, and now it was time to keep that fire burning. Enter Susan B. Anthony, a woman who would become to Stanton what Robin is to Batman, unwavering in her loyalty, fierce in her own right, and absolutely crucial to the mission. Together, they would take on societal norms with the kind of determination that could have moved mountains, or at least gotten someone to finally invent a more comfortable corset. Stanton and Anthony met in 1851, and it was like the universe had decided it was time for a power couple to shake things up. The venue for their first meeting, an anti-slavery lecture in Seneca Falls, no less. Talk about a meet-cute with a cause. Susan B. Anthony, unlike Stanton, came from a Quaker background, which meant she was practically raised on a diet of egalitarian principles. Her family was steeped in activism, her father having lost his cotton mill for refusing to use slave-produced cotton. If Stanton was the fiery orator, Anthony was the meticulous strategist, and together they formed a partnership that was as dynamic as it was effective. Now, let's clear up a common misconception. Stanton and Anthony weren't always on the same page. They had differences, sometimes as glaring as a bad haircut. Stanton, with her razor-sharp wit, could be a bit more radical in her demands, while Anthony was often the voice of pragmatism. Yet, this tension was precisely what made them formidable. They complemented each other like peanut butter and jelly, seemingly different but undeniably better together. Economically speaking, the timing of their partnership was crucial. The 1850 were a period of economic growth, but also of inequality. While the Industrial Revolution was in full swing, offering more jobs to women, the pay gap was as wide as the Grand Canyon. Women earned a pittance compared to men, and their legal rights were virtually non-existent. In 1851, the average annual income for a woman was a mere fraction of a man's, around $250 compared to $500. It was this economic disparity that fueled Stanton and Anthony's resolve to push for women's rights, particularly the right to vote, which they saw as a stepping stone to achieving broader equality. The duo was nothing if not relentless. They organized conventions, gave speeches, and published articles, all while facing ridicule and sometimes outright hostility. Picture them as intrepid explorers in a jungle of patriarchy, machetes in hand, hacking away at the dense underbrush of societal norms. And like any good adventure story, they had their fair share of run-ins with the law. In 1872, Anthony was famously arrested for voting in the presidential election, a bold move that was about as legal as jaywalking in a no-walk zone. She was fined $100, which she refused to pay. "Not a penny shall go to this unjust claim," she declared, a statement that was as bold as it was defiant. And here's where myth and reality dance their awkward tango. The romanticized version of their story paints them as universally admired heroes, but let's not kid ourselves. They were often viewed as radical troublemakers. Newspapers of the time weren't exactly clamoring to throw them ticker-tape parades. Instead, they were more likely to depict them as nuisances, like mosquitoes at a picnic. Yet this never deterred them. Stanton and Anthony were united by an unshakable belief in their cause, and their partnership was the backbone of the women's rights movement. Now, you might be wondering how they managed to fund their activism in a world where their economic opportunities were so limited. The answer is both practical and inspiring. They relied on donations, speaking fees, and the occasional financial support from fellow allies. It's a testament to their resourcefulness that they managed to keep the movement alive on a shoestring budget, proving that while money talks, determination shouts from the rooftops. Their activism wasn't just about making noise, though. It was about strategic planning and relentless lobbying. Stanton and Anthony understood that real change required more than just fiery speeches. It required legislation. They spent considerable time drafting petitions and lobbying lawmakers, a process that was about as enjoyable as watching paint dry, but infinitely more important. They focused on securing property rights for women, understanding that financial independence was a crucial component of true equality. The myth of immediate success looms large in any historical narrative, but the truth is that progress was painfully slow. The women's suffrage movement faced setbacks that would have made a lesser duo throw in the towel. After all, the 15th Amendment, passed in 1870, granted African American men the right to vote, but left women out in the cold. This exclusion was a bitter pill to swallow, and it led to tensions within the movement. Some argued for a more inclusive approach that combined racial and gender equality, while others believed focusing solely on women's suffrage was the only way forward. Stanton and Anthony, despite their flaws, were unwavering in their determination to see women gain the right to vote, even if it meant occasional friction with fellow reformers. In the face of adversity, the duo's sense of humor was their secret weapon. They often employed wit to disarm critics and diffuse tense situations. Anthony, for example, once quipped that she would rather vote than die, a statement that underscored the absurdity of denying women such a fundamental right. Their humor was not only a coping mechanism, but also a rhetorical tool that highlighted the ridiculousness of the status quo. As the years rolled on, the movement gained momentum, slowly but surely, like a glacier inching its way across a landscape. By the late 19th century, women's suffrage had become a hot-button issue, and Stanton and Anthony were at its epicenter. They continued to tour the country, giving lectures and rallying support, often traveling by train or horse-drawn carriage, a far cry from modern-day jet-setting activists, but no less impressive for its time. Their partnership spanned more than 5 decades, a testament to their shared vision and enduring friendship. And while they didn't live to see the fruits of their labor, women's suffrage wouldn't be achieved until the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920. Their legacy was undeniable. They had laid the groundwork for future generations, and their tireless advocacy had brought the issue of women's rights to the forefront of national consciousness. As we draw this chapter to a close, it's essential to remember that Stanton and Anthony were not superheroes. They were human, with all the complexities and contradictions that come with it. Yet, in their humanity, they found strength, and in their imperfections, they found purpose. Their story is a reminder that change is often slow and arduous, but it is also inevitable for those who dare to dream big and fight hard. So, as we leave them for now, let us carry their spirit forward, knowing that the journey they started is far from over. The next part of this tale will delve deeper into their struggles and triumphs, so stay tuned. There's much more to discover. As we dive into the later years of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, it's time to shift gears and tackle some of her more controversial chapters. A time when her pen became as mighty as any sword, slicing through both societal norms and the expectations of her own allies. If you thought the earlier parts of her life were spicy, buckle up, because Stanton's later years are where the real fireworks begin. By the time the 1880s rolled around, Stanton had become a seasoned veteran in the relentless battle for women's rights. But rather than resting on her laurels or fading into the background, she decided to take on her most daring project yet, the Woman's Bible. This wasn't just any Bible. It was a radical reimagining of the good book, designed to challenge the patriarchal interpretations that had long shackled women in both religious and social contexts. Think of it as the literary equivalent of a mic drop at a church potluck. Stanton's Woman's Bible was released in 2 parts, first in 1895 and then in 1898, and it was nothing short of a theological grenade. She didn't rewrite the Bible, but instead offered commentary on its passages, pointing out the misogyny and bias with a razor-sharp wit that was as enlightening as it was provocative. Imagine a book club where everyone suddenly realizes the book they've been discussing for centuries might just have a few more plot holes than previously thought. Now, let's talk about the myth versus reality here. The romanticized version of Stanton's later years paints her as a universally revered matriarch of the suffrage movement, but the truth is a tad more complex. The Woman's Bible was controversial even among her fellow suffragists. Some saw it as empowering, while others viewed it as a distraction from the pressing issue of voting rights. It was as divisive as pineapple on pizza. Some loved it, others thought it was heresy. The economic context of the time only added another layer to the controversy. The late 19th century was a period of significant change in America, marked by rapid industrialization and social upheaval. The gap between the rich and poor was widening, and religious institutions often served as pillars of stability in an uncertain world. By challenging these institutions, Stanton was treading on dangerous ground. Her critique wasn't just theological, it was also an economic and social commentary. She was questioning the very structures that many people depended on for guidance and support. But Elizabeth wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. Her stance on religion was as bold as it was polarizing. She argued that the subjugation of women was rooted in religious doctrine, and that true equality could only be achieved by dismantling these outdated beliefs. It was a stance that earned her both admiration and scorn, and it was a reminder that even within progressive movements, there can be a wide array of opinions and strategies. The suffrage movement was no monolith. It was more like a dysfunctional family reunion, complete with awkward silences and the occasional heated debate over dinner. The publication of the Woman's Bible led to some serious drama within the National American Woman Suffrage Association, NORSA, an organization Stanton had helped lead. The NORSA board, eager to maintain a unified front and avoid alienating potential supporters, distanced itself from Stanton's work. In a move that could rival any modern-day office politics, they passed a resolution stating that the Woman's Bible was not endorsed by the association. Ouch. That's the 19th century equivalent of being unfriended on social media. But let's not forget the economic realities at play here. Publishing a book, especially one as contentious as the Woman's Bible, wasn't a cheap endeavor. Stanton had to rely on her network of supporters to help fund the project, proving once again that while ideas can be revolutionary, they often need cold, hard cash to make an impact. The cost of printing and distributing the book was significant, and without the backing of a major publisher, Stanton was taking a financial risk as bold as her theological claims. Despite the controversy, or perhaps because of it, the woman's Bible found an audience. It sold well enough to keep the conversation going and challenged readers to reconsider the intersection of faith and gender. Stanton's work was a reminder that true progress often requires questioning the sacred cows of society, even if it means ruffling a few feathers along the way. Now, let's pivot to the strategic and not-so-strategic moves within the suffrage movement, an arena that could give any modern political drama a run for its money. The late 19th century was a time of both cooperation and conflict among women's rights activists. Alliances were formed and broken, and the movement was as much about navigating personal relationships as it was about pursuing political goals. Stanton's partnership with Susan B. Anthony remained a cornerstone of the movement, but it was also a source of tension. The two women often differed on strategy, with Anthony favoring a more pragmatic approach, while Stanton pushed for broader social reforms. This tension was emblematic of the larger debate within the movement. Should the focus be solely on securing the right to vote, or should it encompass a wider array of social issues, including labor rights and racial equality? The economic context of the time played a significant role in shaping these debates. The Industrial Revolution had transformed the American economy, creating new opportunities and challenges for women. As more women entered the workforce, they faced harsh conditions and low pay, and the suffrage movement had to grapple with these realities if it hoped to remain relevant. It wasn't just about the vote. It was about economic independence and the right to be recognized as equals in a rapidly changing society. As the 19th century drew to a close, the suffrage movement faced a new challenge, the rise of the new woman. This was a generation of women who were more educated, more independent, and more eager than ever to break free from traditional roles. They were the daughters and granddaughters of the women who had attended the Seneca Falls Convention, and they were ready to take up the mantle of leadership. But with new blood came new ideas, and not all of them aligned with Stanton's vision. One of the myths worth debunking here is the idea that the suffrage movement was a seamless ascent to victory. In reality, it was a roller coaster of triumphs and setbacks, with internal squabbles and external opposition threatening to derail progress at every turn. The movement was divided on issues of race, class, and strategy, and these divisions often played out in public, much to the delight of their detractors. The economic landscape was also shifting. The Panic of 1893, a severe economic depression, had left many Americans struggling, and the suffrage movement had to contend with the reality that for many people, the right to vote was not their most immediate concern. The movement's leaders had to navigate a complex web of priorities, balancing the urgent needs of working-class women with the broader goal of securing political rights. Stanton's later years were marked by a sense of urgency. She knew that time was not on her side, and she was determined to see the fruits of her labor before her time was up. She continued to write, speak, and advocate for women's rights with a fervor that belied her advancing age. Her speeches were as fiery as ever, and her pen remained a weapon of choice. As we wrap up this part of the story, it's clear that Elizabeth Cady Stanton was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who refused to be bound by the limitations of her time. Her later years were a testament to her unyielding spirit and her willingness to challenge the status quo, even when it meant standing alone. Her legacy is one of courage, conviction, and the relentless pursuit of equality, a story that continues to inspire new generations of activists and dreamers. And while we must leave her for now, rest assured that her journey is far from over. In the next part, we'll delve deeper into the legacy she left behind and the movement she helped shape. So stay tuned, because the story of Elizabeth Cady Stanton is one that refuses to be silenced, echoing through the corridors of history with a voice as powerful as ever. As we pivot from Elizabeth Cady Stanton's fiery later years towards the long shadow she cast over history, it's like stepping back from an epic fireworks display, still dazzled by the afterglow, yet eager to see what's illuminated in its wake. Stanton didn't just shake up the 19th century. She set the stage for the 20th century's main event, the full-blown feminist movement. Her life was a masterclass in turning personal affronts into social revolutions, a legacy that would be the envy of any modern-day influencer. Let's be clear. Stanton didn't single-handedly invent feminism, but she certainly gave it a megaphone and a manifesto. By 1920, when the 19th Amendment was ratified, granting women the right to vote, Stanton had been gone for 18 years. Yet her fingerprints were all over that victory. Think of her as the architect who drew up the blueprints for a skyscraper she wouldn't live to see completed. Her speeches, writings, and unyielding advocacy laid the groundwork for the suffrage movement's eventual success, much like how the foundation of a building determines its height and strength. But before we get too misty-eyed, let's bust some myths. The romantic notion of Stanton as a universally beloved pioneer is as accurate as a romantic comedy. Sure, she was a trailblazer, but she was also a polarizing figure, even within her own movement. Her views on religion and race were sometimes controversial, a reminder that heroes are often as flawed as the rest of us. Her woman's Bible was a theological bull in a china shop, and her occasional resistance to expanding the suffrage movement to include African-American women shows she was not immune to the prejudices of her time. Yet, these complexities make her legacy all the more human and instructive. Stanton's legacy isn't just about the right to vote. It's about the broader vision of equality she championed. She fought for women's property rights, access to higher education, and employment opportunities, issues that remain relevant today. In her day, a married woman had about as much legal autonomy as a pet goldfish, and Stanton was determined to change that. By 1900, some states had begun to pass laws granting women the right to own property and retain their wages, thanks in no small part to the groundwork laid by Stanton and her contemporaries. Her advocacy helped transform the perception of women from domestic ornaments to active participants in public life. The economic context of Stanton's activism is crucial for understanding her impact. In the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution was both a blessing and a curse for women. It opened new job opportunities, yet reinforced gender pay gaps and exploitation. By pushing for legal reforms, Stanton was addressing the economic disparities that were as glaring as a lighthouse on a foggy night. Her efforts paved the way for future labor reforms and the eventual recognition of women's economic contributions. Fast forward to the 20th century, and you'll find that Stanton's spirit was alive and well in the suffragists who picked up where she left off. The likes of Alice Paul and Lucy Burns, who led the charge for the 19th Amendment, were standing on the shoulders of giants like Stanton. They continued the fight with the same vigor and determination, organizing parades, silent protests, and hunger strikes that captured national attention. These women were the direct beneficiaries of Stanton's tireless advocacy, proving that her influence was as enduring as it was profound. So, what did Stanton's legacy ultimately achieve? For starters, she helped redefine what it meant to be a woman in society. Her insistence that women deserve the same rights and opportunities as men has become a bedrock principle of modern feminism. Her work laid the groundwork for subsequent waves of feminism in the 1960s and beyond, which tackled issues like reproductive rights, workplace equality, and sexual harassment. Stanton's vision of equality was expansive and inclusive, even if she didn't always live up to her ideals in practice. As we wrap up this journey through the life and legacy of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, it's worth reflecting on the complex tapestry she weaved. She was a woman of contradictions, both radical and conservative, visionary and flawed. Her story is a testament to the power of perseverance and the impact one determined individual can have on the world. She reminds us that progress is often messy and fraught with setbacks, but that doesn't make it any less worthwhile. In the end, Stanton's legacy is a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a living, breathing narrative shaped by real people with real struggles and triumphs. Her life was a testament to the idea that change is possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. She taught us that the fight for equality is a marathon, not a sprint, and that every step forward, no matter how small, brings us closer to the world we envision. So as you drift off to sleep, pondering the remarkable journey of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, remember this: Her legacy is not just a chapter in a history book, but an ongoing story that we are all a part of. Her fight for equality continues through each of us as we strive to live up to the ideals she championed. And in that, we find the true power of her legacy, a legacy that refuses to be silenced, echoing through the ages with a voice as powerful and necessary as ever. In the steamy jungles of Mesoamerica, where humidity makes your hair misbehave and bug spray is your best friend, the Maya civilization began to plant its roots, literally. It's the kind of place where vibrant green isn't just a color, it's a lifestyle. But we're not here to discuss the flora, fascinating though it is. We're delving into the ancient Maya, whose rise is as intriguing as a mystery novel and as complex as assembling flat-pack furniture without the instructions. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty of what made the Maya tick. First, a little geography lesson. The Maya settled in parts of modern-day Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. This sprawling region is a buffet of geographical features, from lowlands to highlands, with climates that range from mildly sweaty to why did I even bother showering? It's this diverse landscape that provided the perfect backdrop for the Maya to thrive. But let's not kid ourselves. Thriving in the jungle wasn't a walk in the park. It was more like a trek through a dense rainforest, machete in hand. Yet the Maya weren't just surviving, they were engineering a civilization. Their secret weapon, maize. Yep, good old corn. Move over, potatoes. While the Incas were getting cozy with their tubers, the Maya were turning corn into the cornerstone of their diet and economy. It wasn't just a food source, it was the stuff of legends, and literally the stuff of life. According to Maya mythology, humans were created from corn. Take that, Wonder Bread. But let's not get too caught up in the corn worship. The real magic was in the ingenuity of Maya farmers who turned the southern Mesoamerican landscapes into mega farms. They used techniques like slash-and-burn agriculture. Basically, the prehistoric version of out with the old, in with the new, to clear the land. This process was not without its downsides, like soil depletion, but let's face it, every system has its bugs, right? The painstaking labor of these early agriculturalists paid off. By around 2000 BCE, they were growing not just maize, but beans, squashes, and chili peppers. It's like they were crafting the first farm-to-table restaurant menu. These crops fueled population growth, and soon enough, small villages were blossoming into bustling urban centers. Think of it as the ancient version of gentrification, but instead of hipster coffee shops, you got ancient pyramids and bustling markets. Speaking of markets, the Maya were no strangers to trade. They didn't have Amazon Prime, but they had something arguably better, a network of trade routes that spanned hundreds of miles. These routes not only moved goods, but also ideas, technology, and even gossip. Who doesn't love a good rumor mill, even in ancient times? They traded everything from jade and obsidian to salt and textiles. The trade networks were like the veins of the civilization, pumping life and wealth into every corner. As these trade routes expanded, so too did the complexity of Maya society. Suddenly, there were more roles than just farmer or hunter. We're talking traders, craftsmen, priests, and of course the elite. Ah, the elite. Every society has them, and the Maya were no different. These folks didn't just hoard wealth, they hoarded power, establishing a social hierarchy that would make the cast of Downton Abbey blush. Early urban centers like Nakbay and El Mirador began to rise around 800 BCE. These were not just cities, they were statements. The Maya were saying, look at us, we're organized, we're innovative, and we can build really big things. It's like the ancient equivalent of posting your vacation photos on social media, only with more stone and less Wi-Fi. Now, let's talk about one of the great myths, that the Maya were somehow gentle stewards of the earth. It's a lovely thought, but the reality is more complex. Sure, they were skilled agriculturalists, but they also had to wrestle with the environment to get those crops to grow. Deforestation was real, and it had its consequences, but you have to admire the tenacity. They faced challenges head-on, adapting and innovating to ensure survival and prosperity. Through all this, the Maya were laying down the roots of a civilization that would eventually rival any in the ancient world. They weren't just planting crops, they were planting the seeds of a society that would produce some of the most remarkable achievements in art, architecture, and astronomy. In essence, the early Maya were the original multitaskers. They managed to juggle farming, trading, city building, and the creation of a complex social structure without the help of modern conveniences. And all of this was happening while the rest of the world was still trying to figure out the wheel. The rise of the Maya civilization is a testament to human ingenuity, adaptability, and let's be honest, a bit of stubbornness. After all, who else could turn a few ears of corn into a thriving empire? And speaking of empires, let's dive headfirst into the political playground of the Maya, where city-states were as numerous and fractious as rival cliques in a high school cafeteria. Forget about a unified empire. The Maya preferred a decentralized system, where each city-state was like its own mini-kingdom, complete with a king who thought he was the bee's knees. Think of it as ancient Mesoamerica's answer to Game of Thrones, minus the dragons, but with plenty of political intrigue. These city-states, like Tikal, Kapan, and Palenque, were powerhouses of their own, each vying for dominance with varying degrees of success, and a whole lot of drama. It's said that Tikal and Calakmul were the big kids on the block, constantly trying to outshine each other like siblings fighting for attention. Their rivalry was the stuff of legend, involving alliances, betrayals, and wars that would make Shakespeare proud. The Maya kings were not just rulers, they were master strategists who played a long game of chess with real lives at stake. Now, let's not get carried away by the allure of these grand titles. The kings, or Ajor as they were called, weren't just sitting on thrones looking regal. They had responsibilities that would make your average corporate CEO break into a sweat. These guys were seen as divine intermediaries between the gods and the people, and that was a job with serious pressure. One wrong move, and you could have a drought on your hands, or worse, an uprising. No wonder they wore those elaborate headdresses. They probably needed them to cushion the stress. The divine authority of the Maya kings was no light affair. It was embedded in their very identity, as they traced their lineage back to the gods themselves. This not only legitimized their rule, but also gave them a kind of celestial insurance policy. Who's going to argue with a guy who claims to be a descendant of the sun god? Yet, despite this divine right, the kings were also expected to be savvy rulers, warriors, and diplomats. A tall order, but hey, it came with the territory. However, let's not romanticize these rulers too much. While they were building temples and commissioning art, they were also knee-deep in the politics of war and expansion. The Maya kings were both patrons of culture and instigators of conflict, proving that you can indeed be both a lover and a fighter. Their legacies, etched into stone with hieroglyphs, tell tales of conquests and ceremonies, offering a glimpse into their world, a world that was as brutal as it was brilliant. Ah, Maya hieroglyphs, the ancient equivalent of Instagram stories, but with a lot more staying power. The Maya writing system was a marvel of its time, a complex blend of logograms and syllabic symbols that recorded everything from royal lineages to astronomical observations. It was like having a library at your fingertips, if your fingertips happened to be made of limestone. These glyphs were not just scribbles, they were the lifeblood of Maya culture, preserving their history and achievements for posterity. The Maya were also the original cosmic geeks, dedicating themselves to the study of the stars with an enthusiasm that would put modern astronomers to shame. They developed a calendar so precise, it made 2012 conspiracy theorists lose their minds. But jokes aside, their understanding of celestial cycles was profound, guiding agricultural practices and religious ceremonies. It was like they had a front row seat to the universe's grand show, and they made sure to take notes. So, while the kings were busy asserting their divine rights, and the scribes were carving history into stone, the Maya were also mapping the skies with an accuracy that still impresses today. Their astronomical achievements were no fluke. They were the result of centuries of observations and calculations. And let's not forget the ball game, an ancient sport that was part athletic prowess, part religious ritual. It was like the Super Bowl, but with a lot more at stake, sometimes even life itself. In the end, the Maya civilization was a tapestry of innovation and tradition, woven together by the threads of politics, culture, and science. They were the overachievers of the ancient world, balancing the demands of daily life with a relentless pursuit of knowledge and power. Their story is one of triumph and tragedy, of human ambition and divine mystery. And as we continue to unravel the complexities of their civilization, we find ourselves both awed and humbled by their legacy. A legacy that, like their hieroglyphs, stands the test of time. As the Maya civilization unfurled its grandeur like a peacock in full display, It was time to talk about some of its most iconic symbols, those jaw-dropping pyramids and ball courts. Forget the pyramids of Giza. The Maya had their own monumental architecture that screamed, "We mean business." These structures weren't just about reaching for the sky. They were the heartbeats of political power, religious fervor, and economic might. Let's start with the pyramids, those behemoth staircases to the heavens. Constructed from limestone, these structures were the ancient equivalent of skyscrapers, only without the elevators or the corner offices. They were built to honor gods, commemorate rulers, and let's be honest, to show off a bit. The most famous of these is the Pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, a feat of engineering and astronomy that aligns perfectly with the equinoxes. Talk about a celestial showstopper. The pyramid itself is a testament to the Maya's grasp of mathematics and astronomy, with 365 steps, one for each day of their calendar year, proving they could count better than most of us can today. Building these giants wasn't just a matter of piling up stones and hoping for the best. It was a logistical nightmare that required meticulous planning and a workforce that could rival a small army. Think of it as the ancient world's most intense team-building exercise, only the stakes were a bit higher than bragging rights at the office Christmas party. The laborers who toiled on these projects had no cranes, no bulldozers, just sheer human grit and determination, dragging massive limestone blocks over miles of rugged terrain. And let's not forget the overseers, who had to ensure the workers didn't revolt or, worse, take a siesta on the job. But why go through all this trouble? Well, these pyramids were more than just architectural marvels. They were symbols of divine authority. By building them, the rulers were essentially saying, "Look how close we are to the gods." Literally. It was public relations, Maya style. The rulers cemented their divine status, and the people got a pretty impressive place to hold their ceremonies. It was a win-win, unless you were the one hauling the rocks. Then there were the ball courts, those curious sporting arenas that dotted the Maya landscape like ancient stadiums. The game played here, known as pits, was no leisurely Sunday kickabout. This was a high-stakes event where the loser could literally lose their head. Talk about pressure. The courts themselves were architectural wonders, often flanked by sloping walls and adorned with carved reliefs depicting the game's mythological significance. The sport wasn't just physical prowess. It was a religious ritual, a cosmic battle between life and death. Forget about a trophy. The players were vying for spiritual glory. Now, here's where we bust a myth. Not every game ended with human sacrifice. While it's true that some matches had deadly consequences, they weren't the norm. The idea that every game was a bloodbath is more Hollywood than history. Still, the fact that it happened at all adds a certain edge to the whole affair. Imagine playing basketball, knowing the losing team might not be around for the celebration dinner. It puts a new spin on the term sudden death. Behind these grand constructions and rituals lay a complex web of political and economic systems. The Maya weren't just building for the sake of it. They were constructing power, quite literally. These monumental projects were a statement of wealth and influence, a way to attract trade and solidify alliances. They were the ancient world's version of a LinkedIn profile, showcasing a city-state's capabilities and aspirations. But let's not forget the challenges. Constructing these massive structures required resources, lots of them. The limestone quarries had to be mined, the stones transported, and the workers fed and organized. It was an economic commitment that could strain even the most prosperous city-state. And yet, despite the odds, the Maya managed to pull it off time and again, turning their cities into bustling hubs of culture and commerce. So, while the pyramids and ball courts stood as symbols of Maya sophistication, they were also reminders of the civilization's resilience and ingenuity. In the shadow of these structures, the Maya society thrived, weaving together the threads of religion, politics, and economy into a tapestry that was as intricate as it was impressive. In the grand narrative of Maya civilization, these monumental projects were more than just stone and sweat. They were embodiments of a culture that dared to dream big and reach for the stars, quite literally. And in doing so, they left behind a legacy that continues to inspire awe and wonder long after the last stone was laid. As we dig deeper into the Maya world, it's clear that they were far more than the sum of their pyramids and ball courts. They were a people who lived by the stars, fought for glory, and built wonders that defied time. Their story is one of triumph, tenacity, and a touch of the divine. a story that's far from over. As we continue to explore their world, we find ourselves not just looking back in time, but also forward as we strive to understand the lessons they left for us, etched in stone and spirit. But as much as we'd love to leave the Maya frozen in a snapshot of glory, pyramids gleaming and ball courts echoing with cheers, we must confront the elephant in the jungle, their decline. Oh yes, the Maya didn't just vanish like a magician's rabbit, despite what sensationalized documentaries might suggest. Instead, their civilization underwent a slow, complex transformation, like a candle burning at both ends, until only waxy remnants remain. Let's start by tackling the favorite villain in this story, drought. Around the 9th century, the Maya lowlands faced significant climate changes, cue ominous thunderclaps. Research shows that a series of droughts hit the region, effectively turning their lush environments into the ancient equivalent of a bad hair day. The evidence is in the dirt, literally. Sediment cores from lakes reveal decreased rainfall during this period, which was about as welcome as a mosquito at a picnic. When your society is as heavily reliant on agriculture as the Maya were, losing consistent rainfall is akin to losing Wi-Fi during a Netflix binge. Catastrophic. But before you assign all the blame to Mother Nature, let's sprinkle in some socio-political drama. The Maya world was a veritable chessboard of city-states, each one trying to checkmate the others. Warfare became increasingly common in the late Classic period, about 600 to 900 CE. And we're not talking about friendly skirmishes over who gets the last taco. These were brutal conflicts, often involving sieges and the capture of rival kings. The archaeological evidence speaks volumes. Fortifications built around cities, mass graves, and the sudden abandonment of monumental architecture. When you're busy fighting your neighbors, who's got time to build another pyramid, right? Internal strife also played its part. As city-states grew, so did the social stratification. The elite lived in opulence, while the common folk were left to toil in the fields, or, worse, go off to war. There's only so long you can keep that kind of imbalance going before the peasants start storming the castle, metaphorically speaking. The rulers were supposed to intercede with the guards to ensure good harvests and stability. When that didn't happen, because, drought, their divine approval rating took a nosedive. Discontent simmered, and in some cases it boiled over. The idea of the Maya simply vanishing is a myth more persistent than a bad penny. Sure, some cities were abandoned, but this was hardly a mass exodus into oblivion. In reality, the decline was a patchwork of collapses and continuities. While the grand cities of the southern lowlands withered, places like Chichen Itza in the north were rising like stars in a new constellation. The Maya civilization didn't just disappear, it shifted, regrouped, and continued in new forms. The post-classic period was far from a dark age. It was a time of transformation and adaptation, with new centers of power and new political equations. So, why the myth of sudden disappearance? Well, who doesn't love a mystery? The romantic notion of a civilization swallowed whole by the jungle has captivated imaginations for centuries. It plays into our love of the enigmatic, the lost, the forgotten. But let's face it, the truth is usually less glamorous. The Maya didn't vanish. They evolved, leaving behind a legacy that would echo through the ages. Economically speaking, the decline wasn't just about climate and warfare. It was also about resource management. The slash-and-burn agriculture that had served them so well was starting to show cracks. Soil depletion and deforestation were taking their toll. Imagine trying to run a marathon on a diet of candy bars. Eventually, you're going to hit a wall. The same principle applied here. Their agricultural practices, once innovative, couldn't keep pace with the environmental changes and population demands. Trade networks, the veins of Maya economic life, were also under stress. As warfare disrupted routes and alliances shifted, the flow of goods, jade, obsidian, cacao, became less reliable. It's like having your favorite online shopping site crash during a sale, frustrating and economically crippling. The loss of trade didn't just mean fewer luxury items. It meant economic stagnation and a loss of the social glue that held disparate city-states together. Now, here's a spicy tidbit. Some researchers suggest that the Maya's own success sowed the seeds of their downfall. They had mastered their environment so well that they inadvertently overshot their own carrying capacity. With populations booming, resources stretched thin, and social tensions rising, the delicate balance that sustained the Maya civilization began to tilt precariously. It's the classic tale of Icarus flying too close to the sun. Only in this case, the wings were made of maize and limestone. But let's not paint too bleak a picture. The decline of the Maya civilization, like any historical change, was multifaceted and far from uniform. While some areas suffered, others adapted and even thrived. The Maya were nothing if not resilient, and their culture continued to evolve, influencing the region long after the last stone was carved. In the end, Maya story is a testament to human ingenuity and the complexity of societal change. It's a reminder that civilizations don't just disappear. They transform, leaving behind echoes that resonate through history. As we pull back the vines of myth and mystery, we find not a lost world, but a world that was, and still is, very much alive. And so, the Maya endure, not just in the ruins that dart the landscape, but in the spirit of people who dared to dream, even in the face of adversity. But the Maya endure, not just in romanticized ruins covered in vines, but in the vibrant culture that pulses through modern Central America. Let's take a moment to appreciate how they've left their fingerprints on the modern world. Fast forward to the 19th century, when a little thing called rediscovery became all the rage. European explorers and archaeologists, armed with more curiosity than cultural sensitivity, hacked their way through jungles and stumbled upon the remains of ancient Maya cities. Cities like Tikal, hidden under a blanket of greenery, were once again exposed to the world. These ruins, with their imposing pyramids and intricately carved stelae, were nothing short of a revelation. Remember that scene in an adventure movie where the protagonist wipes away centuries of dust to reveal a hidden treasure? It was kind of like that, but with more mosquitoes. What these explorers found was not just stone and rubble. It was a complex civilization that had mastered art, architecture, and astronomy. It was like finding a lost library, only with more jaguar motifs and fewer overdue finds. The rediscovery of these sites sparked a wave of Maya mania that swept through academic circles like a viral cat video. Scholars and adventurers alike were captivated by the grandeur and mystery of the Maya. Their art, with its intricate glyphs and vivid depictions of gods and kings, was more than just eye candy. It was a window into a world that had once thrived with creativity and power. But hold your horses. While it's tempting to think of the Maya as a civilization frozen in time, the truth is far more dynamic. The modern descendants of the Maya number in the millions and inhabit areas across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. These communities have preserved their languages, traditions, and crafts, weaving them into the fabric of modern life. The resurgence of interest in Maya culture isn't just about looking back. It's about celebrating a living heritage. Take, for example, the Maya language. Contrary to popular belief, it's not a dead dialect spoken only by archaeologists and history buffs. Around 6 million people speak various Maya languages today, and efforts to preserve and promote these languages are in full swing. It's like a cultural renaissance, with language schools and community programs popping up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, ensuring that the voices of the past continue to echo into the future. And let's not forget the culinary legacy. The next time you dig into a plate of tamales or savor a cup of chocolate, give a little nod to the Maya. They were the original foodies, crafting flavors that have stood the test of time. Maize remains a staple in the region, a testament to its enduring importance. The Maya didn't just shape their world, they flavored it too. Now, onto debunking some more myths, because who doesn't love a good reality check? One of the most persistent is the notion that the Maya were somehow passive victims of their environment, swept away by forces beyond their control. But in reality, they were active agents in their own story, constantly adapting and innovating. They were not just at the mercy of the jungle, they were its architects, carving out cities and societies that defied the odds. Another myth, the one that paints the Maya as an entirely peaceful civilization, falls apart under scrutiny. Yes, they were astronomers and architects, but they were also warriors and diplomats, navigating a political landscape as treacherous as any Game of Thrones plotline. The truth is richer and more complex than any single narrative can capture. So why does understanding the Maya matter today? Beyond the academic intrigue and tourist dollars, their story offers lessons in resilience and adaptability. The Maya remind us that civilization isn't just about skyscrapers and Wi-Fi. It's about community, culture, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. In a world facing environmental and social challenges, these lessons are more relevant than ever. As we wrap up this exploration of the Maya, let's leave behind the romanticized ruins and focus on the living legacy. The Maya are not a relic of the past. They are a vibrant part of the present and future. Their art and science continue to inspire. Their languages continue to be spoken, and their cultural practices continue to thrive. In the end, the Maya civilization is not just a chapter in a history book. It's a living testament to human ingenuity and endurance. So, the next time you gaze upon a Maya pyramid or read about their astronomical achievements, remember that you're not just looking at a relic of the past. You're witnessing a story that's still being written, a legacy that continues to unfold. The Maya have not vanished. They have simply evolved, proving that while civilizations may rise and fall, the spirit of a people endures, echoing through time, like the haunting call of a distant howler monkey in the jungle. If you were living in the Indus Valley civilization, a society that was strutting its stuff around 3,300 to 1,300 BCE, chances are you'd be pretty impressed, or maybe just confused by the lack of Wi-Fi. This Bronze Age society didn't just pop up on the map. It sprawled across what today we'd call Pakistan and northwest India, covering an area over 25 million square kilometers. That's the equivalent of about half of modern-day Mexico. So, not exactly a tiny village. Now, let's talk about Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, two of the biggest stars of the Indus Valley cities. Think of them as the New York and Los Angeles of their time, minus the paparazzi, but with a lot more bricks. These urban centers were built with such precision that modern urban planners might weep with envy, or maybe just relief, that they don't have to lay bricks by hand. The streets were laid out in a strict grid pattern, which means you could wander around without getting lost, provided you didn't mind bumping into a cow or two. The cities were so meticulously planned that they even had advanced drainage systems. Yes, folks, these ancient urbanites had sewage systems more sophisticated than some modern cities, proving that nobody likes a street that doubles as a river of refuse. But what about the people who lived there? The social setup of the Indus Valley civilization was as intricate as the beadwork they left behind. This civilization had a penchant for order, and that extended to their social hierarchy. We're talking about a society that emphasized communal living, and by the looks of it, some form of centralized governance. The rulers weren't just sitting around on ornate thrones. They were probably more concerned with urban planning than royal banquets, though we can't rule out a penchant for ancient snacks. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The role of women. Often overshadowed in history, women in the Indus Valley weren't just making the tea and darn socks. Archaeological evidence suggests that they might have been quite influential. Figurines of women found in excavations suggest that female deities were worshipped, hinting at a society that might have valued women more than just for their pottery skills. But let's not get too romantic here. There's no clear evidence of gender equality as we understand it today. Still, the presence of female figures in religious and cultural artifacts certainly suggests a nuanced role. Speaking of myths, let's debunk a few while we're here. The Indus Valley civilization is often romanticized as a utopia of peace and harmony, largely because there's a notable lack of weapons found in archaeological digs. However, absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Just because they weren't hoarding swords like some civilizations doesn't mean there was never any conflict. Maybe they just preferred a good shouting match over a duel, or perhaps their version of a heated debate involved strategic water management rather than warfare. The harsh reality is that despite their advancements, the people of the Indus Valley were not immune to the whims of nature. There's evidence that suggests climate change played a significant role in their decline. Rivers that once supported their agriculture may have dried up or changed course, sending the civilization into a slow spiral of decline around 1900 BCE. It's a bit like when your favorite cafe shuts down because the coffee beans just stopped growing. Finally, let's sprinkle in a bit of economic context. This was a society that thrived on trade. The Indus Valley people were in regular contact with Mesopotamia, swapping goods like precious stones, textiles, and probably a few tall tales. This wasn't just an ancient version of eBay. It was a crucial part of their economy that kept the wheels of civilization turning. But this trade wasn't a one-way street. The goods that flowed in and out of the Indus Valley were integral in maintaining their urban lifestyle, providing not just luxury items, but also essential resources. So, what can we gather about the Indus Valley civilization? It was a society that valued order, had a penchant for urban planning, and a complex social structure where women might have had more to say than in many contemporary societies. It was a civilization that thrived on trade and ingenuity, yet was ultimately at the mercy of environmental changes. While the myths paint a picture of peaceful harmony, the reality is a bit more like a complex jigsaw puzzle, with pieces still missing. But hey, who doesn't love a little mystery with their history? Let's shimmy right into the heart of the Indus Valley, where daily life was a buzzing web of activity, starring none other than women. These ladies were far more than background players. They were the unsung heroines of the economic stage, the powerhouse behind the gears of agriculture and crafts. Imagine them as the original multitaskers, seamlessly juggling roles that kept the civilization from collapsing like a house of cards during monsoon season. First, let's talk agriculture. Before you roll your eyes and think, yeah, I know, digging in the dirt. Consider this. Indus Valley women were likely integral to farming operations, given how much food production relied on manual labor. They weren't just planting seeds, they were cultivating the very foundation of their society. Evidence from excavations suggests that crops like wheat, barley, and pulses were staples, and guess who was probably elbow-deep in this grain game? That's right, the women. While the archaeological record doesn't explicitly hand us a blueprint of women in fields, the sheer scale of agriculture implies their involvement. It's not like they had John Deere tractors out there, after all. And if you think the agricultural scene was impressive, wait until you hear about the crafts. The Indus Valley was a veritable Etsy shop of its time, churning out beads, textiles, and pottery like nobody's business. Women were likely the artisans behind these intricate goods. Those famous Indus Valley beads, found as far afield as Mesopotamia, didn't just fall from the sky. They were meticulously crafted, possibly by women whose steady hands and artistic eyes turned raw materials into sought-after treasures. Archaeological digs have uncovered bead-making tools in what appear to be residential areas, suggesting that crafting wasn't confined to the workshop. It happened right at home, amidst the chaos of daily life. But let's pause for a hot second to debunk a shiny myth: the idea that the Indus Valley was a feminist utopia. While women played significant roles, the notion of gender equality as we know it, not so fast. It's easy to get swept up in the romantic idea of women ruling the roost, but archaeological evidence doesn't hand us a solid verdict on their social status. What we do know is that they were crucial to the economy, which is a pretty big deal by ancient standards. Their contributions might not have earned them equal rights, but they certainly earned them a critical place in society's functioning. Now, let's add some international flavor to this tale with trade. The Indus Valley wasn't content to keep its goods local. It was an early adopter of globalization, engaging in trade with Mesopotamia, a cool 500 kilometers away. This was no small feat. Imagine hauling goods across that distance without the convenience of modern transportation. Those trade routes were the ancient equivalent of a long-haul trucking route, possibly involving river navigation on the Indus and a series of overland journeys. And women, ever the industrious participants, were likely involved in producing the textiles and beads that made their way to Mesopotamian markets. It's like they were running their own ancient supply chain before it was cool. This cross-cultural exchange wasn't just about goods. It was a two-way street of ideas and practices. The flow of materials like lapis lazuli and carnelian beads didn't just fatten wallets. It enriched the cultural tapestry. Mesopotamian records even mention a place called Meluha, believed to be the Indus Valley, highlighting the significance of this trade relationship. This wasn't just a swap meet. It was an essential lifeline for both civilizations. Yet, it's worth noting that the economic benefits weren't evenly distributed. While trade brought prosperity, it likely also created disparities. Those who controlled the trade routes and production centers probably enjoyed the lion's share of wealth, while others, including many women, might not have reaped the same rewards. It's a harsh reminder that even in booming societies, the gap between haves and have-nots can be as wide as the Indus River itself. Let's not forget the impact of all this economic activity on daily life. The bustling markets of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro would have been alive with the chatter of bartering, the clinking of goods, and the smell of fresh produce. Women, being at the heart of production, were likely central figures in these vibrant scenes. Their work wasn't just about survival. It was about sustaining a complex urban society. They were the original economic influencers, wielding their craft and agricultural prowess to keep the wheels turning. In the grand scheme of things, the women of the Indus Valley were more than just footnotes in history. They were the bedrock of their civilization's economy, their hands shaping the very goods that fed the trade networks and supported urban life, while the archaeological record leaves us with more questions than answers about their exact roles. What's clear is that without their contributions, the Indus Valley might have been just another forgotten blip in history. As we wrap up this chapter, let's leave the door open for more exploration. The lives of these women, intertwined with the ebb and flow of commerce and culture, offer us a tantalizing glimpse into a world where their work was both ordinary and extraordinary. We're left with the realization that understanding their contributions is key to unlocking the full story of the Indus Valley, a story that's still unfolding like the pages of an ancient manuscript, waiting for each line to be deciphered. And speaking of unfolding pages, let's flip to a chapter that's caught the imagination of many, the Indus Valley's cultural and religious tapestry. Now, if you've ever heard someone wax lyrical about goddess worship in ancient civilizations, you might be picturing the Indus Valley as an ancient feminist utopia. Spoiler alert, reality isn't quite so idyllic. While it's true that artifacts like figurines and seals suggest a reverence for female deities, this doesn't automatically translate to a matriarchal society. Let's dive into the facts and figures that paint a more nuanced picture. Start with those famous figurines, often dubbed Mother Goddess figures. Some scholars have looked at these and thought, aha, evidence of goddess worship. But hold your horses, or in this case, your buffaloes. These figurines, predominantly found in domestic settings, could easily represent fertility symbols rather than objects of worship. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of lucky charms rather than deities commanding a pantheon. These small clay figures, often discovered in household hearths, suggest that women were associated with domestic and fertility roles. The harsh reality is, despite the presence of such artifacts, there isn't a shred of concrete evidence that women were calling the shots in religion or politics. However, the romantic allure of goddess worship persists because, let's face it, the idea of an ancient society where women wield divine power is just too tantalizing to resist. But the truth, as always, is a tad more mundane. Then there are the seals, those enigmatic little squares of steedite that have baffled archaeologists for decades. These seals feature a variety of images, from animals to mysterious symbols that resemble riding. Among these images are depictions of women, and some scholars have interpreted them as priestesses or goddesses. But again, there's a catch. While the seals undoubtedly hold religious significance, interpreting them as evidence of a matriarchal society is a stretch. Sure, these symbols could represent powerful women, but they could just as easily symbolize abstract concepts or mythical figures. And here's a juicy tidbit for those who love a good mystery. The Indus script remains undeciphered to this day. That's right, folks, we've got thousands of these seals, and not a clue what they actually say. So, when it comes to understanding women's roles in religion, we're left reading between the lines, or, in this case, between the symbols. It's like trying to piece together a novel, and you've only got the cover and the spine. Now, let's talk about art and culture, because the Indus Valley wasn't all about trade and agriculture. They had a flair for artistic expression, with pottery, sculpture, and beadwork that would make any modern artisan nod in appreciation. Women likely played a significant role here, too, crafting the beads and textiles that were both everyday items and luxury goods. The artistry found in these objects speaks volumes about the culture's aesthetic values, even if the artists themselves remain nameless. But before you start picturing these women as ancient Picassos, remember that the art world back then didn't come with fame or fortune. These were not individual expressions of genius, but collaborative efforts tied to social and economic needs. Women's artistic contributions were crucial, yet they weren't about self-expression so much as they were about community function and trade. It's a reminder that while art can be timeless, the artists themselves often remain in the shadows. So, what do all these artifacts and cultural expressions tell us about women in the Indus Valley? They suggest a society where women were seen as life-givers and maintainers of the domestic sphere. This doesn't mean they were powerless or voiceless. On the contrary, their roles were vital to the social and economic fabric. However, the notion of a society where goddesses ruled and women walked in equal stride with men is more myth than reality. What's truly fascinating is how these artifacts offer a glimpse into the gender dynamics of the time, revealing a world where women were both revered and restricted. Their contributions were celebrated in art and religion, yet their autonomy remained limited by the societal norms of the day. It's a paradox that continues to echo through history, showing us that the struggle for gender equality isn't just a modern battle, but one that has been fought for millennia. As we unravel these layers, it's clear that the Indus Valley civilization was a complex society with intricate gender roles and cultural values. The romantic image of goddess worship is a compelling narrative, but the reality is far more nuanced. Women were undoubtedly influential, shaping the culture through their roles in art, religion, and daily life. Yet they operated within a framework that didn't afford them the full equality we might have hoped for. So, as we leave this chapter open-ended, let's ponder the implications of these artifacts and what they reveal about human nature. The story of the Indus Valley women is one of resilience and resourcefulness, of playing pivotal roles even when the odds were stacked against them. It's a reminder that history is a tapestry woven from countless threads, each one telling its own story while contributing to the larger picture. And there you have it, another layer of the Indus Valley unveiled, with more questions than answers, but plenty of food for thought. As we continue to explore this ancient civilization, let's keep questioning, keep unraveling, and keep our minds open to the myriad possibilities that history has to offer. Because if one thing's for sure, it's that the past isn't just a foreign country, it's an entire universe waiting to be explored. As we peer into the intricate mosaics of the Indus Valley, let's shimmy over to the political scene. Now, if you're picturing grand palaces with throne rooms straight out of a fantasy novel, temper your expectations. This isn't Westeros. It's more like a meticulously organized HOA meeting, minus the bickering over lawn gnomes. The political environment of the Indus Valley is a bit of an enigma, wrapped in a riddle and served with a side of mystery. First, the governance, or what we think it might have been. We're talking about a civilization that left us no Rosetta Stone to decode its political structure. Archaeological evidence suggests a system of centralized authority, but whether it was a monarchy, an oligarchy, or a particularly disciplined form of anarchy is anyone's guess. Unlike Egypt's pharaohs or Mesopotamia's kings, the Indus Valley rulers didn't plaster their names on every available surface. Instead, they might have been more like low-key city planners, quietly ensuring that the streets ran straight and the sewage didn't stink up the joint. This brings us to the social structure. Much like the grid patterns of their streets, the Indus society appears to have been organized with a focus on order and efficiency. Social stratification was likely in play, even if it wasn't as overt as a caste system. Evidence from burial sites suggests some form of social hierarchy, with grave goods varying in quality and quantity. So, while the myth of a peaceful, egalitarian society is appealing, the reality seems more like the first episode of a reality TV show. Everyone's smiling, but you know drama's around the corner. And speaking of drama, let's talk about women in this setup. We've already explored their economic contributions, but what about their political clout? Here's the kicker. Much like their male counterparts, women's roles in governance are shrouded in ambiguity. The presence of female figurines might hint at their involvement in religious or cultural leadership, but conclusive evidence of political power? Not quite. It's like trying to find a unicorn in a herd of horses, passable, but unlikely. While it's tempting to envision women as political powerhouses, the artifacts tell a more subdued story. The idea of a peaceful, egalitarian society where women were equal players is a romantic notion, but the evidence points to a more nuanced reality. Women were certainly valued, but as with most ancient societies, their influence was likely circumscribed by the norms of the time. Now, let's zoom out and consider the broader societal organization of the Indus Valley. Lack of monumental architecture dedicated to rulers suggests that power wasn't concentrated in a single figure or dynasty. Instead, it may have been distributed among various city-states, each with its own governing body. Think of it as a loose federation of cities, each humming along to its own rhythm, yet unified by shared cultural and economic ties. The absence of overt military structures or weaponry has led some to dub this civilization as peace-loving. But let's not get carried away with Cumbaya visions. The lack of weapons might indicate a preference for conflict resolution through diplomacy or trade, rather than outright war. Yet, it's possible they simply opted for weapons made of perishable materials like wood, leaving no trace for archaeologists to find. After all, you don't need a bronze sword to settle a dispute, and a well-placed stick will do. The allure of a conflict-free society is strong, but as any student of history will tell you, human nature has a way of complicating things. Even in a society as advanced as the Indus Valley, tensions were likely simmering under the surface, whether over resources, trade disputes, or social inequalities. The idea that they lived in perpetual harmony is as tempting as it is fanciful, much like imagining a world where everyone has perfect Wi-Fi. Let's pivot to the economic context, which played a significant role in shaping the political and social dynamics. The Indus Valley's economy was a well-oiled machine, driven by agriculture, crafts, and trade. But where there's wealth, there's power, and those who controlled the flow of goods likely wielded significant influence. This wasn't just about who got the biggest piece of the pie. It was about who held the knife. Trade, as we previously touched on, wasn't just a commercial activity. It was a political tool. Control over trade routes and resources could make or break a city's standing within the broader civilization. Those at the helm of this economic juggernaut were the power brokers, shaping policy and influencing the social fabric. So while the political landscape might not feature grandiose displays of power, it was undoubtedly shaped by the ebb and flow of wealth. Yet, despite their economic prowess, the Indus Valley people couldn't control the elements. Climate change and shifting river patterns eventually led to their decline, a humbling reminder that even the mightiest civilizations are at the mercy of nature. It's a tale as old as time. Just ask the dinosaurs. What does all this tell us about the Indus Valley's political and social landscape? It paints a picture of a society that prized order and efficiency, with a governance model that favored collective responsibility over individual glory. Women, while integral to the economy and cultural life, operated within a framework that didn't grant them overt political power. And despite the romantic myth of a peaceful utopia, the reality was likely more complex, with social stratification and potential conflicts lurking beneath the surface. As we delve deeper into this ancient world, we're left with more questions than answers. But that's the beauty of history. It's an endless puzzle, with each piece offering a glimpse into the past. So, while the Indus Valley may not have been the utopia some imagine, it remains a testament to human ingenuity and resilience in the face of an ever-changing world. Stay tuned, because the saga of the Indus Valley is far from over, and there's plenty more to uncover in this ancient epic. As the curtain falls on the Indus Valley civilization, it's time to tackle the age-old question. What went wrong? Picture this. A society that had mastered urban planning, trade, and craft, yet found itself caught in the crosshairs of environmental upheaval. It's a bit like watching a five-star chef struggle with a stove that's suddenly gone on the fritz. Around 1900 BCE, the Indus Valley began its decline, and it wasn't because they ran out of bricks. The primary suspect, Mother Nature playing her unpredictable hand. Climate change reared its inconvenient head, altering monsoon patterns and wreaking havoc on the rivers that were the lifeblood of agriculture. The once mighty Saraswati River, thought to have supported many Indus settlements, may have dried up or shifted course, turning fertile fields into dust bowls. When your society relies on predictable flooding to nourish crops, a disappearing river is like a magician yanking the tablecloth and the table from under you. As agriculture faltered, so did trade. The bustling markets that once hummed with the exchange of goods from Mesopotamia to the Arabian Peninsula found themselves facing empty stalls. No crops meant no surplus, and without surplus, Trade routes that had been the civilization's arteries began to clog. Imagine running an international trading network on a shoestring budget, and you get the picture. When the goods dried up, so did the wealth and influence that trade had brought. It was a domino effect of economic woes, each piece knocking the next into disarray. Now, let's talk about the women who had been the backbone of this economic machine. With agriculture in decline, the roles of women likely shifted dramatically. They had been the unsung heroes of farming and crafts, but as the food supply dwindled, survival took precedence over trade and artistry. This wasn't just a change in occupation, it was a seismic shift in social dynamics. When the riverbeds ran dry, women's roles as agricultural powerhouses were swept away, leaving them to navigate new societal currents. But here's the kicker. While the decline curtailed traditional roles, it might have also opened new avenues. As city-states scrambled to adapt, women could have taken on diverse tasks, from bolstering household economies to engaging in local trade networks. Think of it as history's version of a career change forced by economic downturn. It's not that they suddenly became CEOs of Indus Inc., but necessity often breeds innovation, and women likely found ways to adapt and contribute in new contexts. As we sift through the debris of this ancient civilization, it's tempting to romanticize their decline as a tragedy of biblical proportions. Yet, the truth is more prosaic. They were victims of circumstances beyond their control, trying to adapt in an unforgiving environment. The notion of a peaceful society succumbing to nature's whims is a compelling narrative, but it glosses over the resilience and adaptability that must have characterized their last days. Now, let's pivot to reflect on the legacy of the Indus Valley civilization. While their script remains undeciphered, their achievements are etched in history's stone tablets. They gave us early urban planning, sophisticated water systems, and a trade network that would make modern logistics firms nod in appreciation. Their society was a testament to human ingenuity, showing that organization and cooperation can flourish even in the prehistoric era. But beyond bricks and beads, what lessons do they offer us today, especially in terms of gender dynamics? For one, they remind us that women have been integral to societal success for millennia, even when the history books forget to mention it. The women of the Indus Valley were economic powerhouses, artisans, and perhaps even spiritual leaders, showing that gender roles, while often constrained, were never static. And what of the myth-busting? It's essential to acknowledge the allure of romanticizing the past, envisioning peaceful matriarchies or utopian societies. Yet, history's reality is messier, more complex, and infinitely more human. The Indus Valley wasn't a paradise lost. It was a civilization that thrived and faltered, like so many others, under the weight of nature's unpredictability and human ambition. As we wrap up our exploration, let's toast to the cyclical nature of history. Civilizations rise and fall, often for reasons that resonate with today's challenges: environmental changes, economic fluctuations, social transformations. The story of the Indus Valley isn't just a tale of ancient glory. It's a reminder that the past isn't a dusty relic, but a mirror reflecting our own world. So the next time you're stuck in traffic, grumbling about urban planning, spare a thought for the Indus Valley folks. They had it figured out, at least until the rivers conspired against them. In the grand tapestry of human history, the Indus Valley civilization weaves a thread of ingenuity, adaptability, and yes, a little mystery. The women of this society, often overlooked, were the quiet architects of their world, adaptable and resilient in the face of change. As we ponder their legacy, let's draw inspiration from their story, a story of a society that, even in decline, offers lessons in resilience, adaptability, and the enduring power of human spirit. And who knows, perhaps the secrets of their script will one day unlock new insights, adding yet another chapter to this fascinating saga. Until then, let's keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep our eyes peeled for the next revelation from the sands of time. Once upon a time, in a land with more dramatic weather than a reality TV show, there was a region so fertile it made every ancient farmer drool. Yes, we're talking about Mesopotamia, the so-called cradle of civilization, lying snugly between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Now, if you're thinking this sounds like the perfect place to set up an ancient heirloom, you'd be right. Mesopotamia's got the allure of prime real estate written all over it, but with a few pesky caveats that would have made even the most enthusiastic realtor pause. Let's start with the basics. This cradle, practically the baby boom of human civilization, was nestled snugly in the Fertile Crescent. We're talking about a crescent so lush it could give the moon a run for its money. Stretching from modern-day Iraq through parts of Iran, Syria and Turkey, this area was a veritable Garden of Eden, sans the snake, but with plenty of unpredictable flooding. The land was so fertile that it was like nature's own version of a supermarket, providing crops and resources that could support burgeoning populations. You know what they say, location, location, location. But here's the plot twist. Mesopotamia was also a bit of a drama queen when it came to weather. While the land was fertile, those Tigris and Euphrates rivers had mood swings more unpredictable than a soap opera villain. Flooding was a constant threat, and not the gentle kind that waters your garden. Nope, these were the kind of floods that could wash away your entire village if you weren't careful. Yet, the Sumerians, with the tenacity of a DIY enthusiast determined to finish their latest project, saw an opportunity. They figured if they could harness these waters, they'd hit the agricultural jackpot. And so, around 4500 BCE, the Sumerians rolled up their sleeves and started crafting some of the first city-states the world had ever seen. These weren't just any cities. They were the creme de la creme of ancient urban planning. Uruk, one of the oldest cities, became a bustling hub with a population that hit upwards of 50,000 people by 2900 BCE. Talk about urban sprawl. The Sumerians knew a thing or two about innovation. They developed irrigation systems that would make any modern-day engineer proud. These early urbanites channeled the wild waters of the Tigris and Euphrates to irrigate their fields, turning Mesopotamia into a breadbasket of barley and wheat. It was like they turned a floodplain into an all-you-can-eat buffet. Who needs stable ground when you've got irrigation ditches and levees? But let's zoom out a bit and consider the bigger picture. The allure of Mesopotamia was magnetic. It wasn't just the Sumerians who wanted a piece of that fertile pie. The region attracted various groups, each wanting to cash in on the agricultural bonanza. It was like a never-ending game of musical chairs, with each new group hoping to snag a seat in this prime piece of ancient real estate. The Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians all had their eyes on the prize, and they were willing to fight for it. Sumeria was like the Manhattan of its time. Everyone wanted in, but only a few could afford the price of admission. Now, while the romantic narrative paints Sumer as a peaceful paradise of progress and prosperity, the reality was a tad more complicated. These city-states weren't just about communal living and shared resources. They were competitive, often clashing over resources, land, and power. Think of it as an ancient version of keeping up with the Sumerians, with every city trying to outdo the others in size, wealth, and influence. Economically, the stakes were high. Control the agricultural output, and you controlled the wealth. The Sumerians developed trade networks that stretched far beyond their borders, exchanging grain for timber, metals, and other resources they lacked. It was like the ancient version of Amazon Prime, but with donkeys instead of drones. Their cuneiform writing, one of the earliest forms of written expression, wasn't just for poetry and prayers. It was a tool for keeping track of transactions, inventories, and laws. It was bureaucracy at its finest, or perhaps its most nascent. Politically, the rise of city-states also brought the rise of kings. These weren't just any kings. They were often seen as the earthly representatives of the gods. In a world where divine favor was the ultimate endorsement, these rulers wielded both spiritual and temporal power. The legendary King Gilgamesh of Uruk, for instance, wasn't just a ruler. He was a demigod hero whose exploits were immortalized in epic poetry. His story, filled with adventures and existential musings, was possibly the world's first great piece of literature. Move over, Shakespeare. But let's not get too swept away by the grandeur. Underneath, all the epic tales and architectural feats were very real, very human challenges. Building a civilization in a flood-prone area required constant vigilance and innovation. The Sumerians had to be both architects and agrarians, constantly adapting to their environment. They were the real Mac-Jivers of the ancient world, turning adversity into opportunity with a reed stylus in one hand and a plough in the other. And so, As the sun set over the dusty plains of Mesopotamia, the Sumerians had laid the groundwork for what would become the foundation of human civilization. They turned a harsh, unpredictable environment into a thriving hub of culture and commerce. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving against the odds. They didn't just live in Mesopotamia. They transformed it, setting the stage for the civilizations that would follow. In this land of contrasts, where floods gave life as easily as they threatened it, the Sumerians learned to balance the scales, quite literally, of water and earth, challenge and innovation. And they did so with a flair that would make any modern city planner tip their hat in respect. As we turn the page to explore their legacy further, remember, in the ancient world, as in our own, the challenges we face often shape the greatness we achieve. Welcome to the world of the Sumerians, where the cradle of civilization rocked to the rhythm of ingenuity and ambition. So, with the Sumerians setting the stage and the world watching, or at least as much as the ancient world could watch, these early innovators embarked on a path that would change human society forever, the invention of writing. Picture this. The year is somewhere around 3200 BCE, and the Sumerians are knee-deep in barley and bureaucracy. They needed a way to keep track of all those bushels of grain and jars of oil, not to mention the ever-expanding list of who's owed what. Enter the rock stars of record-keeping, cuneiform and clay tablets. Imagine the scene. A Sumerian scribe, sitting cross-legged on the floor, gripping a reed stylus as if it were Excalibur itself, ready to inscribe the latest shipment of barley onto a fresh clay tablet. This was not just ancient accounting, this was the dawn of written language. Sure, hieroglyphs in Egypt were giving it a shot too, but the Sumerians were all about commerce, baby. They weren't just scribbling for fun, they were laying the groundwork for something more profound. Now, before you dismiss these ancient accountants as dusty old clerks, let's set the record straight. These scribes were the unsung heroes of their time, the tech gurus of Sumeria. In a world without spreadsheets, their clay tablets were the cutting-edge technology. They were the Silicon Valley of the ancient world, minus the hoodies and kombucha. And boy, did they deliver. The first marks on these tablets were simple, pictographs representing goods like sheep, grains, and pottery. But as society became more complex, so did their writing. Over time, these pictographs evolved into abstract symbols that could denote not just objects, but sounds and ideas. This transformation was as groundbreaking as discovering Wi-Fi at a campsite. The Sumerians had unwittingly invented something that would outlast empires and shape civilizations to come. And here's the kicker. What started as mundane bookkeeping didn't stay mundane for long. Those clay tablets, initially used to tally goods, became the canvas for the world's earliest literature. Suddenly, the Sumerians were producing epic poetry that would make Homer blush. The Epic of Gilgamesh. Anyone. This wasn't just a story. It was a cultural milestone, a narrative tapestry woven with themes of friendship, mortality, and the meaning of life. Who would have guessed that the same folks who tallied sheep would also ponder the human condition? But let's not get too sentimental. The reality was, not everyone was penning poetry. Most Sumerians were more concerned with the day's work than with existential musings. For them, writing was a practical tool, a way to navigate the complexities of trade, governance, and law. Remember, this was a society where commerce was king and contracts were sacred. You couldn't just take someone's word when your flock of sheep was on the line. You needed a clay tablet to seal the deal. In many ways, the Sumerians were the OG bureaucrats. As city-states grew, so did the need for administration. Legal codes were etched into tablets, detailing everything from property rights to marriage contracts. These weren't just rules. They were the foundation of civilization's legal framework. Think of it as the ancient world's version of law and order, but without the dramatic courtroom scenes. Every transaction, every agreement was etched in clay, ensuring that no one could conveniently forget the terms later. The significance of writing went beyond the practical, though. It changed how people thought about the world and their place in it. With the ability to record thoughts, history, and laws, the Sumerians were no longer bound by the limitations of oral tradition. They could pass knowledge down through generations, creating a legacy that would endure long after their city-states crumbled. Yet, with all its promise, writing also had its unintended consequences. For starters, it created a chasm between the literate elite and the illiterate masses. Literacy became a tool of power, a way to maintain control and influence. If you could write, you could wield authority, because knowledge was power, even 5,000 years ago. And let's not forget the environmental impact. The Sumerians had to churn out countless clay tablets, which meant they needed a steady supply of clay. Sure, clay was plentiful along the riverbanks, but the demand was insatiable. It was an ancient form of deforestation, if you will, as they stripped the land for resources to keep the wheels of bureaucracy turning. So there you have it. The invention of writing was a double-edged sword. It was both a tool of enlightenment and a symbol of inequality. It was a medium for poetry and a mechanism for control. But like all great innovations, it was a reflection of the society that created it, with all its triumphs and flaws. As we leave our Sumerian scribes to their tablets and styluses, let's pause to appreciate the world they carved out of clay. Their legacy is a testament to human ingenuity and the power of the written word, an invention that has outlasted empires and shaped civilizations. And with that, we turn the page to see what happens next in this unfolding drama of human history. But remember, this is only the beginning. The story of Sumeria is far from over, and there's still plenty of clay to sift through. Stay tuned for more adventures from the cradle of civilization, where the pen, or in this case, the stylus, is mightier than the sword. As the sun set on the Sumerian scribes, clay tablets in hand, let's pivot to the bustling political arena of ancient city-states like and Uruk. If you thought juggling modern politics was a circus, you've got nothing on these early powerhouses. Here, rulers weren't just playing chess with their neighbors. They were playing three-dimensional backgammon with the gods themselves as referees. Uruk, one of the first major city-states, was a behemoth, both in size and influence. By 2900 BCE, it boasted a population of over 50,000, making it the ancient equivalent of a bustling metropolis, minus the coffee shops and Wi-Fi. But what kept Uruk ticking wasn't just its size, it was its political savvy. The city was governed by it, but this wasn't your run-of-the-mill monarch. The king was seen as both a political leader and a divine intermediary, a dual role that would make any modern politician's head spin faster than a chariot wheel. The legendary King Gilgamesh of Uruk, yes, that Gilgamesh, wasn't just content with ruling the roost. His epic exploits, immortalized in the Epic of Gilgamesh, reflect the ambitions and anxieties of a ruler caught between the mortal and the divine. This was a guy who allegedly fought monsters and sought eternal life, all while managing a city that required more irrigation than a modern golf course. Talk about multitasking. But let's not get swept away by the grandeur of epic poetry. The reality was less glamorous. These kings faced constant threats, not just from rival city-states, but from within. Palace intrigue was as common as barley beer, with court officials and family members jockeying for power. In a world where divine favor was the ultimate currency, securing the loyalty of temple priests was akin to having Wall Street backing your IPO. Speaking of temples, they were the heart of Sumerian cities, spiritual and economic powerhouses wrapped in mud brick splendor. The ziggurat, a towering step pyramid, was the city's centerpiece, a literal stairway to heaven. But these weren't just places of worship. They were banks, granaries, and administrative centers rolled into one. The priests who ran them wielded immense influence, controlling the flow of resources, and by extension, the city itself. Imagine a Vatican that also manages your local economy, and you've got the picture. The priests, much like the scribes, were part of an elite class that held the keys to both earthly and divine power. They were the original influencers, long before Instagram gave everyone with a smartphone a platform. But with great power comes great bureaucracy, and the Sumerians were nothing if not bureaucratic. The administration of these city-states was a labyrinthine affair, with officials keeping records on everything from livestock to laborers, all etched meticulously into clay. It was the first instance of red tape, only this time the tape was mud brown. Now, you might wonder how all this was financed. Enter the concept of taxation. Yes, even then, you couldn't escape it. Farmers were obliged to offer a portion of their harvest to the state, a system that kept the granaries full and the guards appeased. It was a delicate balance, with the king acting as the ultimate mediator between the needs of the populace and the whims of the divine. Fail in this duty, and you risked droughts, floods, or worse, the wrath of a populace tired of paying tribute. Let's just say it wasn't an occupation for the faint-hearted. Trade was another pillar of Sumerian society, a complex web of exchanges that reached as far as the Indus Valley in Anatolia. Sumerian merchants were the jet-setters of their time, bartering barley and textiles for timber, copper, and lapis lazuli. These exotic goods not only fueled the economy, but also adorned the temples and palaces, a testament to the city's wealth and connections. It was globalization, ancient style, minus the frequent flyer miles. Of course, all this wheeling and dealing wasn't without its tensions. City-states like and Uruk often found themselves in conflict over resources, trade routes, and territorial boundaries. Wars were fought, not just with soldiers, but with diplomacy, espionage, and alliances. It was a Game of Thrones, long before HBO dramatized medieval power struggles. And like any good drama, there were betrayals, coups, and the occasional divine intervention to keep things interesting. Now, let's not romanticize warfare in the ancient world. Battles were brutal, with chariots and spears replacing polite diplomatic dialogue. The spoils of war were often harsh, with cities sacked, temples looted, and populations enslaved. But in this harsh reality, the Sumerians found a way to thrive. They were the original survivors, adapting to the shifting sands of politics and power with a resilience that would make any modern strategist nod in respect. But as we peel back the layers of Sumerian society, it's clear that their world was one of contrasts. The same bureaucracy that enabled their cities to flourish also sowed seeds of inequality. The elite held sway over the land and its resources, while the majority toiled in the fields and workshops, their labor the backbone of the city's prosperity. The Sumerians had invented civilization, but they had also invented the social stratification that comes with it. As we pause to catch our breath, it's worth remembering that these ancient city-states, with all their flaws and feats, laid the groundwork for future civilizations. They were the pioneers of urbanization, governance, and culture, setting a precedent for those who would follow. And while their world may seem distant, the echoes of their struggles and achievements resonate in our own, a testament to the enduring legacy of the Sumerians. So, as we prepare to delve deeper into the annals of Mesopotamian history, remember that the story of the Sumerians is far from over. There's more to explore, more intrigue to uncover, and more lessons to learn from these ancient architects of human society. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the tapestry of history woven in the cradle of civilization. The stage is set, the players are in place, and the next act promises to be just as riveting as the last. As we continue our journey through the bustling streets of ancient Sumer, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of what made these city-states tick: economics. If you think modern economies with their stock exchanges and cryptocurrency are complex, try balancing a budget in a world where the currency was literally grown in the fields. That's right, folks. The Sumerians ran their economy on barley, the ancient world's equivalent of cold, hard cash. In a land where money didn't jingle, it rustled, barley was the lifeblood of commerce. You could pay your taxes, settle debts, and even buy a pint at the local tavern with a sack of these golden grains. Imagine paying your phone bill with a bag of rice, and you've got the general idea. But before you chuckle at the simplicity, consider this: it worked. Barley was versatile, universally desired, and crucially, renewable. It was the ultimate in sustainable currency, long before anyone worried about carbon footprints. Sumerian merchants were the original hustlers, wheeling and dealing with the finesse of a Wall Street trader. They weren't just trading locally. Their network stretched across the known world, from the cedar forests of Lebanon to the lapis lazuli mines of Afghanistan. Talk about a diverse portfolio. The Sumerians were importing timber, metals, and precious stones, and exporting textiles, grain, and pottery. It was an ancient rendition of buy low, sell high, with a side of donkey caravans instead of cargo ships. Now, let's talk innovation. The Sumerians were the startup nation of their time, constantly pushing the envelope. They pioneered advances in farming that would make any modern ag-tech firm proud. They developed the plow, improved irrigation techniques, and even figured out crop rotation to keep their fields fertile. It's no wonder they could produce enough barley to keep their economy afloat. These folks were agricultural wizards. But for all their innovation, the Sumerians were also practical. They implemented a taxation system that was as ingenious as it was unavoidable. Farmers had to fork over a portion of their harvest as tax, which the state used to fund public works and religious ceremonies. This wasn't just a revenue stream. It was a way to ensure that the community's needs were met, from maintaining those crucial irrigation systems to throwing an epic festival in honor of the gods. And let's face it, when the gods are happy, everyone's happy. Speaking of which, the relationship between religion and economy in Sumeria was as intertwined as a vine on a trellis. Temples weren't just spiritual centers. They were economic powerhouses that controlled vast tracts of land and resources. They were like the Federal Reserve, but with more incense and sacrificial offerings. By managing these resources, the temples played a crucial role in stabilizing the economy, ensuring that both divine and earthly demands were met. But let's not romanticize the past too much. The Sumerian economy, like any, had its ups and downs. Fluctuating harvests, conflicts, and the occasional natural disaster could send shockwaves through the system. It was a delicate balance, and one that required constant vigilance. The Sumerians had to be as adaptable as they were innovative, ready to pivot at a moment's notice. Picture a tech startup navigating a financial crisis, and you get a sense of the challenges they faced. And then there's the human element. The Sumerians were no strangers to the darker sides of commerce. Debt slavery was a harsh reality for those who couldn't pay their dues. If you fell behind on your barley payments, you might find yourself or your family working off the debt in someone else's fields. It was an ancient version of the subprime mortgage crisis, with far more personal stakes. Yet for all its complexities, the Sumerian economy laid the groundwork for future civilizations. They demonstrated that resource management, trade networks, and taxation were not just possible, but essential for a thriving society. Their legacy is a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless drive to trade, innovate, and adapt. So, as we prepare to delve deeper into the annals of Mesopotamian history, remember that the story of the Sumerians is far from over. There's more to explore, more intrigue to uncover, and more lessons to learn from these ancient architects of human society. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the tapestry of history woven in the cradle of civilization. The stage is set, the players are in place, and the next act promises to be just as riveting as the last. So, as we take our final stroll through the bustling bazaars and dusty streets of ancient Sumer, let's talk about the legacies these city-states left behind. Because like that trusty clay tablet, the story of the Sumerians is etched in history with an indelible stylus. First off, let's give a nod to their technological marvels. The wheel, for example, wasn't just for caveman cartoons. Those clever Sumerians were busy perfecting it around 3500 BCE. Imagine a world without wheels, no carts, no chariots, just a lot of heavy lifting. Their innovation set humanity on a roll. And don't forget the plow, which took farming from backbreaking to just plain exhausting. When you're feeding a city of 50,000, every little bit helps. Then, there's the architectural genius of the ziggurat, the ancient skyscraper without the elevator pitch. These massive step pyramids served as religious and economic centers, with priests doubling as both spiritual guides and economic wizards. The ziggurat was not just a show of piety, but a symbol of community pride and architectural prowess. Let's face it, a good ziggurat could really tie the city together. And what about their contributions to the written word? Cuneiform script wasn't just the Twitter of its day. It was the entire internet. From legal codes like the Code of Ur-Nammu to poetry that would make any bard blush, the Sumerians laid the foundation for written communication. Their clay tablets are the ancient ancestors of your favorite paperback novels and tax forms. But alas, not all stories have a fairy tale ending. The decline of Sumer is often painted as a cautionary tale of overzealous river management and political squabbles. Yet, the reality is messier than a clay-stained scribe. It wasn't just one flood too many that washed them away. Environmental changes, invasions by outsiders with less than friendly intentions, and shifts in trade routes all played a part. The Sumerians faced challenges that were as unpredictable as the Tigris and Euphrates themselves. However, let's debunk the myth of Sumer's inevitable doom. While they didn't have a crystal ball, they weren't just waiting for the band to start playing as the ship went down. These people adapted and innovated until the very end, leaving behind a framework that future civilizations would build upon. They were the shoulders upon which the Babylonians, Assyrians, and even the Persians stood. Take their legal systems, for instance. Sumerian law laid the groundwork for codes that would influence Hammurabi himself. Imagine a world without laws, pure chaos, or at the very least, a very messy game of Monopoly. The Sumerians showed us that order could be instilled, even in the chaos of ancient city life. And let's not forget their trade networks. While the Sumerians may have eventually been overshadowed by their ambitious neighbors, they had already connected the dots of the ancient world, from the Indus Valley to Anatolia. The trade practices set the stage for an interconnected world long before globalization was a buzzword. But here's the kicker. The story of the Sumerians is not just one of rise and fall. It's a testament to the enduring human spirit of ingenuity and resilience. They took a harsh, unpredictable environment and turned it into a cradle of civilization, one barley stalk at a time. Their legacy is more than just a pile of ruins. It's a reminder that innovation can thrive in the unlikeliest of places. As we wrap up this saga, let's appreciate the Sumerians for what they were. The original pioneers of urban life, the trailblazers of trade, and the architects of written expression. They remind us that the past is not just a series of unfortunate events, but a tapestry woven with human ingenuity and ambition. So, the next time you find yourself grumbling about the complexities of modern life, just remember, somewhere in the dusty annals of history, a Sumerian scribe is nodding in agreement, stylus in hand, clay tablet at the ready. In a world that's constantly changing, perhaps the greatest lesson the Sumerians left us is that adaptability and creativity are timeless tools in the journey of human progress. And with that, we bid farewell to the land between the rivers, where the seeds of civilization were sown, harvested, and ultimately passed on to the rest of the world. Crete, around 2000 BCE, was the kind of place you'd want to brag about at ancient dinner parties. Nestled in the glittering Mediterranean, this island wasn't just sun, sea, and sand. It was ancient real estate gold. The Minoans, who appeared on this scene, had a knack for turning this strategic spot into a maritime empire that would make even Poseidon envious. They were the Mediterranean's equivalent of Silicon Valley, minus the tech but with plenty of trade swagger. Geographically, Crete was like the Switzerland of the ancient world, but with better beaches and a lot more boats. Its location served as a perfect crossroads between Europe, Africa, and Asia, which might sound like a travel blogger's dream, but back then, it was all about trade routes and economic clout. The Minoans exploited their position like pros, setting up trade networks with Egypt and the Near East. This wasn't just about swapping goods. It was about creating an economic boom as impressive as the hairstyles they sported. Speaking of which, Minoan fashion was a whole vibe. They had these flouncy skirts and cinched waists that would make any modern fashionista pause. The men and women both wore these long, flowing garments that seemed to say, "We have nothing to hide." And maybe that's why they didn't bother with defensive walls. While the rest of the ancient world was busy building fortresses, the Minoans were all like, "Nah, we're good." It's as if they were the original peace and love tribe, confident that their naval prowess would keep the party crashers at bay. Or maybe they just thought, who'd want to mess with people who dress this well? But let's not get carried away with romanticizing these ancient hipsters. Their trade networks were no casual affair. They were importing luxury items like Egyptian alabaster and exporting their own finely crafted pottery. This wasn't a flea market. It was high-stakes commerce. The Minoans were shipping out goods across the Mediterranean, and in return, they got a hefty economic boost, which allowed their civilization to flourish. They were essentially the Amazon of the Bronze Age, minus the 2-day shipping guarantee. Their trading partners included heavyweights like Egypt, which, just to put things into perspective, was in its Middle Kingdom phase around this time. Egypt was no small fry. It was the big cheese, the top dog of the ancient world. By linking up with them, the Minoans were basically rubbing shoulders with the elite. And the Near East, that was like the Wall Street of antiquity, bustling with commerce and innovation. The Minoans were savvy enough to tap into these networks, which says a lot about their strategic thinking. Now, about those missing walls. Some might argue it was an oversight, but maybe the Minoans were just ahead of their time. They seem to have embraced a kind of cultural openness, believing that if you keep your doors open, you'll attract more friends than foes. Or perhaps they just hadn't heard of the Trojan horse yet. Either way, their confidence was as expansive as the seas they sailed. In short, the Minoans of Crete turned their island into a hub of trade and culture that would leave a legacy as enduring as their frescoes. They may not have had the military might of Sparta or the philosophical depth of Athens, but they knew how to throw an economic party that everyone wanted to attend. So, next time you think about ancient civilizations, spare a thought for the Minoans. They might just surprise you with how much they had figured out, like how to live on an island paradise and become the envy of the ancient world. Speaking of surprises, let's talk about the Minoans' architectural achievements. If you think the Leaning Tower of Pisa is impressive, wait until you hear about Knossos, a palace complex that could make even the most seasoned architect break out in a cold sweat. This wasn't just a building, it was a labyrinthine masterpiece. Imagine a structure sprawling over 6 acres, boasting more than 1,000 rooms. That's right, 1,000. It was like the ancient version of Hogwarts, minus the magic, but with plenty of twists and turns to confuse any unsuspecting visitor. Now, Knossos was the crown jewel of Minoan civilization, a testament to their advanced engineering skills and artistic flair. Built around 1900 BCE and continuously expanded, this complex wasn't just for royalty. It was a multi-purpose behemoth, serving as a political hub, religious center, and economic powerhouse. Its intricate design included storerooms, workshops, and even what some historians believe to be the first flushing toilets in Europe. Because who says you can't have luxury plumbing in the Bronze Age? And let's talk frescoes, those vibrant wall paintings that make Instagram filters look like amateur hour. The Minoans were masters of this art form, decorating their palace walls with vivid scenes of nature, festivals, and athletic feats. But here's where it gets interesting. These guys had a thing for bulls. Seriously, bulls were practically the Minoan version of a celebrity crush. They featured prominently in their art, and they even had a sport called bull leaping. Picture this, an acrobat literally grabbing a bull by the horns, vaulting over its back, and landing gracefully on the other side. Talk about an extreme sport. This fascination with bulls ties into the legend of the Minotaur, that half-man, half-bull creature trapped in a labyrinth. While the myth is thrilling, the reality is less about mythical beasts and more about powerful symbolism. Bulls represented strength and fertility, key elements in a society that valued agricultural success and prosperity. The Minotaur myth, with its dark undertones of human sacrifice, probably served as a cautionary tale rather than a historical account. In truth, there's no concrete evidence that the Minoans practiced human sacrifice. Sorry, Hollywood, but sometimes the truth is less gory than fiction. As for the social structure, the Minoans were surprisingly progressive for their time. Women enjoyed a status that would make even some modern societies envious. They participated in religious ceremonies, held positions of power, and were depicted in art as equals to men. This gender parity was both a reflection of their society and a strategic move. When half your population has a say, you're bound to get some innovative ideas on the table. Religiously, the Minoans were all about the goddess game. Their pantheon was dominated by female deities, with the snake goddess being one of the most iconic. This divine lady, often depicted holding writhing snakes, was believed to embody fertility and renewal. It seems the Minoans had a knack for turning potentially terrifying symbols into objects of reverence. Let's not forget the economic context. The wealth generated by their trade networks funded these grand architectural projects and lavish artworks. It's a classic case of money well spent. By investing in their cultural and religious infrastructure, the Minoans not only showcased their prosperity, but also solidified their social cohesion. You could say they were pioneers of the spend money to make money philosophy, but with a focus on cultural capital rather than corporate profits. So, as we marvel at the Minoans' architectural wonders and artistic achievements, it's clear they were a civilization that valued beauty, innovation, and cultural expression. The grandeur of Knossos, with its complex layout and artistic treasures, was a reflection of a society that dared to dream big. And while the myth of the Minotaur adds a layer of intrigue, the reality of the Minoans' accomplishments is impressive enough on its own. They may have been obsessed with bulls, but their true legacy lies in their ability to build a civilization that was as enduring as the legends it inspired. Now, if you thought the Minoans were just landlubbers with a flair for bulls and frescoes, think again. These folks were like the maritime masterminds of the ancient world, a bit like the Bezos of the Bronze Age, but with better tans and none of the space ambitions. Their naval capabilities were as legendary as their labyrinths, turning the Mediterranean into their personal highway. Literally, they were the middlemen of the sea, connecting cultures and economies from the Aegean to the Nile, and doing it all with a diplomatic finesse that would make Switzerland look like it was trying too hard. The Minoans weren't just floating around in any old dinghy, mind you. Their ships were masterpieces of seafaring technology. Picture sleek, long vessels capable of handling the choppy Mediterranean with ease. They were the Maseratis of maritime engineering, powered by both sails and oars, a hybrid model, if you will. These ships could carry between 20 to 50 tons of cargo, a testament to their robust design. Here's a fun fact. These vessels were often adorned with eyes on their prows, perhaps to ward off evil or just to give them that extra edge in the style department. You know, because nothing says, "Don't mess with us," like a ship with 1,000-yard stare. But it wasn't just about having cool ships. It was about where they sailed them. The Minoans charted courses that stretched from Crete to Cyprus, to the bustling ports of the Levant, and down to the resource-rich lands of Egypt. This was no small feat, considering we're talking about distances that could span upwards of 1,000 miles. Their trade routes were the Silk Roads of the sea, and the goods they ferried included everything from precious metals like copper and tin to luxury items such as ivory and gold. They were essentially running a maritime mall, and business was booming. And just to get a sense of their economic impact, let's talk numbers. By 1700 BCE, the Minoans were trading with over a dozen significant cultures, from Mycenaeans in mainland Greece to the Egyptians. This wasn't just about swapping shiny trinkets. It was about economic domination. They had a GDP that would make any ancient economist nod in approval, with trade networks so extensive that they were practically the Federal Reserve of the Mediterranean. And unlike some of their contemporary counterparts, who relied on swords and shields to get ahead, the Minoans preferred a handshake and a trade agreement. Their strategy was simple: make friends, not war. It was a philosophy that allowed them to thrive, while others were busy building walls and sharpening spears. In fact, the Minoans' diplomatic approach was their secret weapon. They operated with a kind of ancient soft power, using their naval prowess to foster alliances rather than tensions. They were the Switzerland of the sea, a neutral ground where goods could be exchanged and cultures could mingle. It was a strategy that not only secured their economic interests, but also kept them relatively free from the conflicts that plagued other regions. When you're the middleman, everyone wants to stay on your good side. So how did they pull this off without a single warship in sight? Well, the Minoans mastered the art of cultural exchange and mutual benefit. They understood that a well-placed gift or a strategic marriage could open more doors than a battering ram ever could. It was about building networks of influence, not empires of fear. And while this might sound like a romantic notion, it was a calculated move that kept their civilization sailing smoothly for centuries. This strategic diplomacy is why we find Minoan artifacts scattered across the Mediterranean. From pottery in the ruins of Crete to frescoes in the palaces of Egypt, their influence was as far-reaching as their trade routes. They left behind a legacy not just in goods, but in ideas, spreading their artistry and innovations throughout the region. The Minoans were the cultural ambassadors of their time, and they used their maritime skills to weave a tapestry of trade and diplomacy that would shape the ancient world. But let's not sugarcoat it. Being the middleman wasn't all smooth sailing. The Minoans had to navigate the choppy waters of political intrigue and economic competition. They faced rival powers who were just as eager to tap into the lucrative trade networks of the Mediterranean. Yet, through a combination of naval prowess and diplomatic acumen, they managed to maintain their position at the center of this complex web. It was a balancing act that required constant vigilance and adaptability, proving that even in the ancient world, the only constant was change. In essence, the Minoans were the unsung heroes of maritime history. They might not have had the military might of later empires, but they had the smarts and the ships to make waves in their own right. As we continue to chart the course of their civilization, remember this: the Minoans weren't just passengers on the sea of history. They were the captains, navigating new horizons and leaving a wake that would ripple through the ages. So next time you think of ancient maritime powers, give a nod to the Minoans, the original masters of the Mediterranean, who knew how to sail the seas and the corridors of power with equal skill. And just when you thought the Minoans were riding high on their sea-sprayed success, the plot thickens. Because, folks, no ancient civilization story is complete without a good old mystery unraveling, a dramatic twist that would make even Agatha Christie raise an eyebrow. As we dive into the decline of the Minoan civilization, prepare yourself for a buffet of theories, each more tantalizing than the last, all vying for the title of most likely culprit. First up, Mother Nature's fiery temper tantrum, the eruption of the Thera volcano, around 1600 BCE. It was like the ancient version of a blockbuster disaster movie, with ash clouds blotting out the sun and tsunamis crashing down like an overly enthusiastic drummer. Thera, now known as Santorini, blew its top in a colossal eruption that scientists rank among the largest in recorded history. We're talking about a volcanic explosivity index, VE of 7, which is just one notch below a megacolossal eruption, like the one that formed Lake Toba in Indonesia. When Thera erupted, it spewed out an estimated 60 cubic kilometers of ash into the atmosphere. Imagine enough volcanic material to fill about 24 million Olympic swimming pools, if you're into that kind of thing. This wasn't just a hiccup. It was a cataclysmic event that sent shockwaves across the Mediterranean. And while there's no concrete evidence that a tsunami directly hit Crete, the psychological and environmental impact would have been seismic. Ash fallout could have affected agriculture, leading to food shortages and economic strain, a real buzzkill for any thriving trade empire. But before we give Thera the full blame, enter stage left, economic decline. Trade, the lifeblood of the Minoan civilization, was a fickle friend. As other emerging powers like the Mycenaeans began to flex their muscles around 1450 BCE, the Minoans found themselves caught in a classic game of economic musical chairs. Suddenly, the once bustling trade routes were less like a freeway and more like a bumpy back road. Competition was heating up, and the Minoans' market share was slipping faster than a toga on a windy day. There's also the matter of internal strife. Archaeological evidence suggests that around this time there was a notable shift in Minoan culture, architecture, and administration. Linear B tablets, a script used by the Mycenaeans, start appearing in Minoan sites, an ominous sign of change. It's like finding a rival's business cards on your desk, a clear indication that new management is taking over. And speaking of new management, let's talk about those Mycenaeans. Think of them as the aggressive corporate raider to the Minoans' laid-back startup. By 1450 BCE, they had made their move, taking advantage of the Minoans' weakened state. Whether it was through outright invasion or a more insidious cultural assimilation, the Mycenaeans were the new kids on the block, and they weren't here to make friends. Their takeover wasn't just a hostile corporate maneuver, it was a complete rebranding. The Mycenaeans brought with them a new administrative style, militaristic influences, and a penchant for fortifications. Unlike the Minoans, who were all about open spaces and natural light, the Mycenaeans preferred their architecture with a side of security. Walls, lots of them, and they weren't shy about showing off their newfound power. But let's not discount the cultural exchange that occurred during this transition. Despite the Mycenaeans' more warlike tendencies, they appreciated a good fresco as much as the next civilization. They absorbed Minoan art, religious practices, and even some of their fashion sense. Picture a Mycenaean warrior rocking a Minoan-style tunic while brandishing a sword, cultural fusion at its finest. Now, let's address the elephant, or perhaps the minotaur, in the room, the allure of sensationalism. A modern fascination with the mysterious disappearance of the Minoans often overshadows the more mundane realities. Sure, it's tempting to imagine their civilization being swallowed whole by a single catastrophic event, but history is rarely that tidy. The Minoan decline was likely a complex interplay of natural disasters, economic shifts, and cultural upheavals. Sorry, conspiracy theorists, but sometimes the truth is more like a messy breakup than a dramatic vanishing act. As the Minoans faded from the scene, the Mycenaeans rose to prominence, establishing themselves as the new maritime power. They took the Minoan blueprint and ran with it, expanding trade networks and continuing the legacy of seafaring prowess. But let's be real, they weren't quite the smooth operators their predecessors were. The Mycenaean story would eventually lead to its own dramatic downfall, but that's a tale for another day. So as we ponder the Minoans' enigmatic exit, let's appreciate the legacy they left behind. A civilization that dared to dream big, navigate the seas with skill, and build a culture that would echo through history. Their influence on the Mycenaeans and subsequent Greek culture can't be understated. It's a reminder that even as empires fall, their stories continue to ripple through time, shaping the world long after their last fresco has faded. And there you have it, the Minoans, a tale of maritime mastery, cultural innovation, and the kind of mysterious decline that keeps historians awake at night. But don't get too comfortable. There's still more to unravel in this ancient saga, and the next chapter promises its own set of twists and turns. Stay tuned. But before we pack away our Minoan history guidebook, let's dive into the legacy they left behind, and how their echoes still reverberate through the annals of time, like a good rock band long after the stage lights fade. If you were to ask the ancient Greeks about their cultural DNA, they'd probably tip their laurel crowns to the Minoans for a few key strands. You see, while the Mycenaeans may have been the muscle, the Minoans were the artistic soul, the Rembrandts of the Bronze Age. For starters, the Minoans kicked off a trend that would shape the aesthetics of ancient Greece, and by extension, the Western world. Their frescoes, with their vibrant colors and dynamic compositions, weren't just wall decor. They were the ancient world's Instagram feed, broadcasting ideas and styles far beyond their shores. The Mycenaeans picked up this artistic baton and ran with it, eventually passing it to the Greeks, who turned it into an Olympic event of cultural expression. And let's not forget architecture. The Minoans' penchant for sprawling palace complexes with intricate plumbing systems was a blueprint that future civilizations would crib notes from shamelessly. The Greeks, inspired by the Minoans' architectural audacity, went on to design their own wonders. The Parthenon, with its imposing columns and delicate friezes, owes a nod to the Minoan architects who first dared to dream big and build bigger. Now, let's talk trade, because who doesn't love a good economic success story? The Minoans were the original free market enthusiasts, setting the stage for the complex trade networks that would later define the Mediterranean economy. Their knack for commerce was akin to the rise of the stock market, minus the ticker tape and insider trading scandals. This legacy of trade and diplomacy laid the foundation for the Greek city-states to emerge as economic powerhouses. In the realm of mythology, the Minoans contributed a rich tapestry of tales and symbols that would later be woven into Greek lore. Remember the Minotaur. While the labyrinth might be a metaphorical maze rather than a literal one, the myth captures the Minoans' deep connection to bulls, which symbolized power and vitality. The Greeks, ever the storytellers, took these elements and spun them into epics that would endure for millennia. But let's not get too misty-eyed over ancient Crete. Fast forward to today, and you'll find that our modern society has a penchant for putting ancient cultures on a pedestal, conveniently ignoring their less-than-glamorous realities. We love to romanticize the past, as if it was all wine, olives, and philosophical debates. Yet, the Minoans, like any civilization, were a complex mix of brilliance and brutality, innovation and intrigue. Sure, they were ahead of their time in gender equality and artistic flair, but they also faced political turmoil and economic challenges. Their story is a reminder that history is messy, full of contradictions and conflicts, not just grand achievements. In our quest to idolize the ancients, we often forget that they too struggled with the same human follies that plague us today. To wrap this up with a flourish, let's borrow from Homer, whose epics were arguably the ancient equivalent of bestseller lists. "In the wine-dark sea, the ship sailed," he wrote, capturing the essence of a civilization that mastered the art of navigation and diplomacy. The Minoans' legacy is as enduring as the legends they inspired, a testament to their ability to harness the power of the sea and the human spirit. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, dreaming of ancient palaces and sunlit seas, remember this: the Minoans weren't just part of history, they helped shape it. Their influence is woven into the very fabric of Western civilization, a reminder that even the smallest island can leave the biggest impression. Here's to the Minoans, the original islanders who taught us that sometimes the greatest legacies are those that sail quietly into the horizon, leaving ripples that last forever.